The Government of the Bahamas and the Bahamas branch of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association present sessions from the 41st Conference of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association under the theme Modernization, an Essential Element for the Independence of Parliament and the Deepening of Democracy. The conference welcomed women parliamentarians, youth parliamentarians, secretaries, delegates, and observers from the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Tonight's session is Youth Parliament, Globalization and the Quest for Sovereignty of Small States.
Madam Speaker,
Pray. Father, thank you for yes, thank you for all of the productive and forward-thinking young persons taking part in these proceedings. We thank you for their passion and their commitment. We pray that they would go on to become leaders in their respective territories, but always placing you before all else. Father, we also pray that today's discourse be enlightening and that you receive honor and glory from all that is said and done. In the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Greetings. It gives me great pleasure to extend the warmest welcome to all of you here today. On behalf of the 16th Annual Youth Parliament and everyone under its name, I can't begin to express how grateful we are to have each and every one of you here. Without your presence, this event would simply not be possible. I would like to express a heartfelt thanks to the government of each country present here today for sending us your best and brightest junior parliamentarians, and for the time and effort you put into them, which undoubtedly speaks volumes towards your reputable governmental structures, and may the firm structures of your governments thrive for generations. A warm welcome is also extended to our very own speaker, Dr. Honorable Kendall Major, and the home crowd and audiences abroad. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your continued support. The world is changing and changing fast. Technology, education, and healthcare are not the same as they were 10 years ago. There is hardly anything in life not changing. Let us not be fearful of this change, but rather open-minded so that we can manipulate this change to work in the benefits of us and our home countries, so that we may reap bountifully from it. It is gratifying to note that the agenda of this conference covers a wide range of components relating to modernization, which is an essential element for the independence of each parliament and the deepening of democracies in small island states. It is of extreme importance that we use this opportunity to discuss problems of mutual interest with our fellow youth delegates of the member countries of this region. The topic of globalization is of immense importance to all of us here today, because whether our home countries decide to adapt or neglect its notions, it will affect each one of us individually. Once again, thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of this conference. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Mr. Lorenzo Carey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg leave to propose the following resolution. Whereas globalization is the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. And whereas the phenomenon of globalization is not only affecting the credit ratings, commerce, cultural identity, trade, but also the sovereignty of small island states. And whereas small island states in the Americas, the Atlantic, and the Caribbean region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in particular are being swept along with the tide of globalization and without regard being had to objections on their part. And whereas these small island states have only recently begun to enjoy the strengthening of their democratic institutions. And whereas it is in the national interest of every nation and the interdependence of regionalization to maintain and safeguard the unique cultural identity, economic interests, and sovereignty of each island state. Now, therefore, be it resolved that all nations in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the CPA strengthen their union and take a united stance and fight against the negative aspects of the encroachment of globalization that runs counter to their national interests. Be it further resolved that this strengthened union commit itself to the preservation of the interests of all member states by entering into regional trade and exchange agreements for food security, education, health, and other aspects of culture. Be it further resolved that this Youth Parliament discuss and offer informed recommendations and solutions to members of this 41st Regional Conference.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Order that the document be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed upon. Whereas globalization is the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. And whereas the phenomenon of globalization is affecting not only the credit ratings, commerce, cultural identity, and trade, but also the sovereignty of small island states. And whereas small island states in the Americas, the Atlantic, the Caribbean region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in particular are being swept along by the tide of globalization, and without regard being had to any objections on their part. And whereas small island states have only recently begun to enjoy the strengthening of their democratic institutions. And whereas it is in the national interest of every nation and the interdependence of regionalization to maintain and safeguard the unique cultural identity, economic interest, and sovereignty of each island state. Now, therefore, be it resolved that all nations in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the CPA strengthen their union and take a united stance against the fight against negative aspects of the encroachment of globalization that runs counter to their national interest. Be it further resolved that this strengthened union commit itself to the preservation of the interest of all of its member states by entering into regional trade and exchange agreements for food security, education, health, and other aspects of culture. Be it further resolved that this Youth Parliament discuss and offer informed recommendations and solutions to the members of this 41st Regional Conference. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member from the Bahamas, Mr. Lorenzo Carey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, during the Han Dynasty of China, the Silk Road not only facilitated commerce between ancient China and the Mediterranean, but it also allowed for the interchange of culture and knowledge, just as social media does today. So in this regard, Madam Speaker, globalization isn't new to the world. This time around, we've just given it a scary name. However, I digress. Madam Speaker, globalization certainly does akin a mammoth ganap tree with its roots spread around indefinitely. Madam Speaker, a large fruit-bearing tree can provide shade, shelter, and sustenance to all of those around. And in this regard, Madam Speaker, globalization can protect and nurture our small island states. However, Madam Speaker, these roots can wreak havoc on those around them, such as the giant cotton tree root that owns the side of Burnett Road, causing cracks in the foundations and compromising structural integrity. Nevertheless, globalization is not a monolithic force, but an evolving set of consequences, some good, some bad, and some unintended, said John Larson. Madam Speaker, I propose that we evaluate this idea of globalization holistically before we decide which fruits to disperse and which roots to avoid or chop when necessary. Madam Speaker, globalization is having an adverse effect on the food security of our small island states. Albeit though, Madam Speaker, it is because of globalization that we are able to splurge and indulge on many of the niceties that we do today. An example I'm sure we'll all take note of after this youth parliament. However, our increasing dependency on imported foods is cause for concern. In 2008, CARICOM states spent an annual of $4 billion on imported foods, a $1.02 billion increase from what it was in 2000. Then, in 2010, the Caribbean demand for U.S. imported foods increased by 5%, Madam Speaker. And then ultimately, in 2011, CARICOM states spent an annual of $4.25 billion on imported foods. In addition, Madam Speaker, intra-regional trade is not only being poorly utilized, but its use itself is declining. In 2000, intra-regional trade accounted for 17.2% of the total annual food import. However, in 2011, this fell, Madam Speaker, to 12.3%. Moreover, 20% of men and over 50% of women in CARICOM states are overweight, which the Food and Agriculture Organization states to be related to the increase in the consumption of imported processed foods, which I may add, Madam Speaker, accounted for $1.83 billion in 2011. Madam Speaker, I wonder if I have the honorable member's attention now. Madam Speaker, albeit that globalization has been of great utility to us in many ways, ironically, it is the very thing that threatens the food security and, by extension, the health and welfare of our small island states. Madam Speaker, our food imports are way too high. We need to cut it. In contrast, though, Madam Speaker, with the peaking roots of globalization comes vitamins for an economy. An article written by Doug Britt states that globalization creates a market structure that forces businesses to be the best, and if not the best, Madam Speaker, then the greatest. Moreover, Madam Speaker, globalization creates an environment for global competition. And in this regard, Madam Speaker, multinational corporations seek foreign host countries to gain the competitive advantage in the global arena. And this, Madam Speaker, is where we, small island states, flourish. According to the World Investment Report, as of 2014, small island developing states in the Caribbean received $5.03 billion in foreign direct investments. And along with foreign direct investments comes employment for the unemployed and sweet technological advancements that are needed to stimulate economic growth. Yet, Madam Speaker, one particular aspect of foreign direct investment stands out, and that is its effect on a country's balance of payments accounts. In summary, Madam Speaker, if a country's account runs at a deficit, that country is going to have to finance this deficit via the sale of its own assets. Take, for example, in the 1980s and the 1990s, the U.S. account deficit was financed not only by stocks, bonds, real estates.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But also entire corporations. Madam Speaker, what if you had 25 cents to purchase a sweet succulent cup on a hot icy day? However, you owed the seller 50 cents. Now, Madam Speaker, you had to borrow to finance your debt, and consequently, no cup for you. Hence, globalization brings with it fruits that we can all appreciate. However, it is good to take in mind that the byproduct of these multinational corporations being here, this is only from their own agenda. What we reap is a byproduct, Madam Speaker. And we should note this, because they do not come here seeking to develop our countries, but only to do business. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, the perpetually encroaching shadow of globalization is no longer encroaching. It is upon us. small island states in the Americas, the Atlantic, and the Caribbean region of the CPA. Will we, small island states, be at a deadlock when this comes? The benefits and consequences of globalization have a great deal to do with whether we are thoughtful and intelligent about how we approach globalization, or whether we are blindly accepting or blindly resisting, said Ethan Zuckerman. Madam Speaker, I propose that we do none, and we simply open our eyes. I propose that we regulate to mitigate the negative aspects of globalization, and we create policies to ensure that the fruits of globalization are fair and equitable to all, Madam Speaker. Individually, we are all capable of great things. Already, Jamaican farmers have slashed their food import bill by $43.6 million, and the CARICOM community is seeking to do the same with their wheat imports by using cassava as a substitute, Madam Speaker. If one person on a small island state were to jump, Madam Speaker, then I can assure you his jump for the most part. Madam Speaker, I beg leave for 15 more seconds.
You may.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Then his jump, for the most part, will go unnoticed. But I assure you, Madam Speaker, if every person on every small island state came together and jumped at the same time, I can assure you our effects would be felt all over the globe. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Mr. Garth Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Globalization is like a sweeping tsunami, and we're all experiencing its effect. Across the world, globalization has boosted and lifted many in poverty in the recent 25 years. Citizens, the government, and countries are more dependent on each other today than ever before. Globalization has busted open the front door for job creation and economic growth. But has these benefits been equally beneficial to those in and out of poverty? Is it equally beneficial to those in the major and lesser developed countries? Is it broadening the gap between the wealthier and poorer nations? Madam Speaker, these are the questions that we are forced to ask. Madam Speaker, I imagine that the aim of globalization was to protect the social and economic development of all the people across the globe. The objective of making the world an interrelated, interdependent global village drives the concept we know as globalization. For some, it is considered essential if we wish to sustain the development of all who inhabit the world. The introduction of technology has made the world smaller and smaller and smaller. The widespread communication networks has tied the world beyond our little national boundaries. Madam Speaker, advocates of globalization argue that it represents free trade. With the government not restricting imports and exports, the economy has the potential to grow and the prices of goods are lowered. Next, the infusion of foreign capital and technology stimulates the economic development of the lesser developed countries. The spreading of prosperity, Madam Speaker, and the introduction to the worldwide market allows all access to products from different countries. But let's not forget the jobs, Madam Speaker, the vital jobs. There are companies which have already begun and is continuing to erect international stores. These transitioning companies provide locals of the destination company with these source of jobs. But Madam Speaker, like everything, there are also those who say that globalization has some adverse views. There are some adverse impacts. Mike Collin, writer from the business magazine Forbes, stated that globalization has been a good thing for developing countries, but has not been so good for the working class of the developed countries and has led to the continued deindustrialization of America. I'm sure other developed countries can also testify to this fact. This is a problem, Madam Speaker, because jobs are instead being transferred to countries which will produce these products at a lower cost. Businesses are attracted to these lesser developed countries for several reasons. First, to take advantage of tax freedoms. Second, to take advantage of the lack of accountability for the mismanagement of the environment and its natural resources. Globalization has also led to the exploitation of our laborers. Unfair working hours, Madam Speaker. Inhumane working conditions, Madam Speaker. Discriminatory wages. Their rights are being ignored so that businesses can profit as much as humanly possible. In many cases, the hands of the government is tied on these issues and many other political issues because these companies are such dominant players in the economy. But Madam Speaker, although these companies provide economic gain, they infringe on the social development of those individuals in our lesser developed countries. Madam Speaker, these are real issues that our brothers and sisters face in lesser developed countries. Kofi Annan, Ghanaian diplomat, compares the argument of globalization to the argument against the law of gravity. No matter how much we look up and we wish on that North Star, both globalization and gravity, it's going to take its course. So, Madam Speaker, the argument isn't for or against globalization, but it's instead, how can we make it more socially and economically equitable? One,
Honorable
Madam Speaker,
member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. One, Madam Speaker, would be leadership, to take a leading role in communicating strategies that would make it more equitable. Second, would be enforcing the rules to create awareness of those nations exploiting other countries, disobeying trade rules, and defying World Trade Organization laws. We must pressure them into adopting. Globalization, a sweeping tsunami, a wave that we can do little to stop. However, through leadership and rules, we can make it more equitable. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many Honorable member, we have heard your speech, so you cannot speak again. Please sit. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Sanchez Road.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Globalization, Madam Speaker. What does this mean for us? Madam Speaker, according to the Business Dictionary, globalization is defined as the worldwide movement towards economic, financial, trade, and communications integration, Madam Speaker. It implies the opening of local and nationalistic views to a broader outlook, to an interconnected and interdependent world, with free transfers of capital, good, and services across an international frontier. But what does this mean for us, Madam Speaker? For us, Madam Speaker, this means a world that will be more connected than ever before. Globalization, Madam Speaker, if managed correctly, will open doors and break down barriers that once stood in the way of the further development of our world, especially in smaller nations, Madam Speaker. This idea of globalization has been prevalent since the days of the ancient Greeks, and still today is used not only as a helpful tool, but as an essential asset in the continued growth of both small and larger nations. Through globalization, Madam Speaker, the world's market prices will be shifted in favor of the common buyer. Because competition within the market will be greater, this will force businesses to bring their prices down in order to compete in this ever-changing market. Allow me to use an illustration, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, an individual can sign on to eBay and find a brand new phone, Madam Speaker, for $500. Now, at this point, Madam Speaker, this individual will have two choices to make. He can either stay on eBay and purchase this $500 phone, or he can leave the site and see if there are any other viable options, Madam Speaker. Just then, this individual can sign on to Amazon.com and see a phone of equal or perhaps even greater value, Madam Speaker, for only $395, Madam Speaker. Now, what phone would you be more inclined to purchase? Obviously, the least expensive phone, Madam Speaker. And if eBay wishes to compete, they will be forced to bring their prices down in order to remain a competitor. And the same will happen within the world market with the advancements of globalization, Madam Speaker. As buyers seek lower prices, sellers will be in a rat race to have the lowest prices in the market, making shopping more rewarding for the customer and helping more businesses to flourish. We also see that globalization can help in the reduction of the unemployment rate, Madam Speaker. According to Bahamas.gov.bs, Madam Speaker, since 2006, the unemployment rate in the Bahamas has drastically increased, rising from 7.6% in 2006 to a mind-numbing 15.7% at the end of 2014, Madam Speaker. And according to predictions of the aforementioned site, these numbers are expected to increase to just above 19% by the year 2020. But globalization, Madam Speaker, will open windows for the unemployed. Hundreds of thousands of jobs will become available, not only here in my local Bahamas, but around the world, Madam Speaker. Bahama, a multi-billion-dollar hotel and resort, is expected to provide over 6,000 jobs for our Bahamians. And as a result of globalization, Madam Speaker, many businesses will begin marketing on a worldwide scale. This will certainly open doors for greater market, ensuring that ventures such as Bahama will be far less to go stale. This will open new gateways for many, many more tourists to enter our small island nation. And although 6,000 may seem insignificant in comparison to the 45,000 unemployed, just imagine the impact that globalization will have on the wider population if it is implemented with good sense. The demand for products and services will call for an increase in personnel and productivity, thus creating a spike in employment and decreasing our unemployment rate. And we would all love to see that unemployment rate go down, Madam Speaker. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, after evaluating the idea of globalization as a whole, I am driven to believe that it is not only...
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am driven to believe that this is not only a good idea, but that it is also a necessity if we wish to alleviate many of the problems that we face in our world today, such as international boundaries, cultural stigmas, poverty, and yes, Madam Speaker, unemployment. But like everything else in life, Madam Speaker, this will not happen overnight. There will be a period of trial and error, but if managed correctly, Madam Speaker, this new order will indeed stabilize itself. And through globalization, Madam Speaker, we will not only make sure that the world will be a better place for us who are already here, but for those who have yet to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from Bermuda, Theo Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My name is Teo Wolf, and I'm here to represent the beautiful island of Bermuda. In my island home, where international business is the backbone of our economy, Bermuda shorts, long socks, a shirt, and a tie are accepted as business attire. So, while I recognize our common histories and cultures, I'm going to address my remarks primarily based on what I know, Bermuda. The Huffington Post estimates that just under 2/3 of the Western world owns smartphones. These pocket-sized devices have increasingly become embedded into the lives of the youth and have allowed us to be connected with the entirety of the world with a single click of a button. Technology has not only brought the world closer, but it has also allowed the world's economy to become a single, interdependent system. Madam Speaker, the world has developed into a global village due to the help of information technology, allowing countries who are not only separated by distance, but also by languages, to share ideas and information with each other. As the youth, we grew with technology, and we must acknowledge the fact that technology is now a catalyst for the exponentially growing globalization. Globalization, as defined in the motion, is the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. Unless applied directly to an industry or movement, it's very difficult to make specific while still letting it apply to many situations. Globalization has built itself a reputation that it generally results in the dissolution of borders between countries, their cultures, and their people. Naturally, this provides many opportunities for the population, as well as introducing new obstacles for people to overcome. At its core, globalization entails the increasing volume, velocity, importance of flows within and across borders, of people, ideas, goods, and a good deal else, challenging one of sovereignty's fundamental principles, the ability to control what crosses borders in either direction. Sovereign states increasingly measure their vulnerability not to one another, but to forces beyond their control. Globalization thus implies that sovereignty is not only becoming weaker in reality, but that it needs to become weaker. In spite of this, we in the Caribbean, Americas, and Atlantic region should also operate as a single entity to cope with the pressures of globalization. Madam Speaker, globalization, whether we like it or not, is in this generation's DNA. It has become such a powerful force that a strengthened union such as the one mentioned in the resolution can be beneficial for the future of the Commonwealth. However, we must also recognize the strengths that globalization presents, and we should and must use them to our advantage. This is cohesive with the statement in the actual CPA benchmarks, whereby the CPA recognized diversity as a strength. Different experiences, approaches, and attitudes foster variations in practices and policies which stimulate innovation everywhere. One of the most visible effects is the improved quality of products due to global competition. As domestic companies have to fight out foreign competition, they are compelled to raise their standards and customer satisfaction levels in order to survive in the market. This creates competition. With globalization, companies have expanded into the developing countries and hence generated employment for them. At the moment in Bermuda, there is a 7% unemployment rate, which has decreased over the past few years due to the introduction of international business. It is also given an opportunity to invest in emerging markets and tap into talent which is available there. While discussing the effects of globalization, how can we forget about the impact of foreign trade on our economy? Comparative advantage has always been a factor. While trade originated in the times of the early kingdoms, it has been institutionalized due to globalization. Previously, constituents had to resort to unfair means and destruction of kingdoms and countries to get what they wanted. Today, it is done in a more humane way, with mutual understanding. People who operate in uncivilized ways have to face the World Trade Organizations, CARICOM, and other world organizations that have been established with a view to control and regulate trade activities of the countries. One of the most powerful effects of globalization is the spread of education. Today, you can move into the search of the best educational facilities in the world without any hindrance, and as a youth, we should find this very appealing. A person living in Bermuda can go to the UK or anywhere else in the world for a new and quite possibly more beneficial experience which he may not find in his home country. If one is interested, one can even get a specialization in subjects not indigenous to his country and then spread knowledge to the home country. While only naming a few of the benefits that encompass globalization, we can see that it offers a lot in which we as small island states can use to our advantage. In addition, as mentioned before, the increasing use of technologies prompts effective communication between states and can be used to improve globalization.
Honorable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's face it, globalization is inevitable. We must recognize its advantageous purposes and use them to strengthen and lead the Caribbean, Americas, and Atlantic region to a prosperous and successful future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from Cayman Islands, Michael Webb.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The resolution before us highlights the profound sense of discomfort about the erosion of natural interest in trade. both of which are being steamrolled by the force of globalization. This backlash has been with us for decades. In the late 20th century, it looked as if the world was moving towards convergence. Even us in the Caribbean got caught with this, as in the year 1956, the West Indies federal government was created. However, where the character of globalization kept changing consumer preferences, or the relocation of production moving closer to the markets where the goods were being sold.
Honorable member, have you forgotten something?
I suggest bowing.
You may continue.
Or the relocation of production moving closer to the markets where the goods were sold. It weakened the growth of our international trade. Therefore, where our region depended mostly on the declining market of agriculture, our predominant nations observed realistic risks of lesser economic islands piggybacking on their finances. This reality led to the West Indies federal government to dissolve in the year 1962. This move away from a globalization union was recently replicated when Britain exited the European Union. Similar concerns of taxation, immigration, trade control, massive depletion.
Stop the clock. Honorable member, what is your point of information?
Would the good member like to quote where he's getting his information from?
Honorable member, would you wish to respond?
I didn't get to hear her. If she can repeat.
Can you please repeat?
I'd like to know where you're getting your information from.
Well, I have many sources.
Can you please stand and repeat?
Of course. Well, I have many sources, such as the history books that were written by our own homegrown Caribbean people.
You may continue.
Thank you so much. Similar concerns of taxation, immigration, trade and control, massive depletion of the public finances, which plagued our West Indies federal government, were no doubt factors which influenced Brexit. Clearly, it can be seen that the process of globalization has not provided the means to overcome the weaknesses and stumbling blocks of our revenue sectors, including tourism. This is witnessed where the emblem of our modern tourism product is the gigantic cruise ship anchored at our docks with a vast amount of passengers walking through our towns in each of our destinations. However, the profitability of this sector is debatable, especially at home in the Cayman Islands, where in 2015 we saw 1.7 million cruise visitors on our shores, as well as bearing witness to the complete destruction of part of our own coral reefs by the Zenith cruise ship anchor. There was a measly $100,000 apology. Really, when you consider that coral reefs cover less than 0.2% of the ocean's floor, I am not convinced that a globalization union is the road we should consider so quickly. It is highly likely to cause a cultural erosion in our region as individual nations are tossed into a melting pot with others who do not respect our worth or understand our cultural context. This fear is realized further when our trained locals migrate, despite sometimes being fully financed by government to acquire their own qualifications. In the 2005 Framework of Action for Temporary Movement of Nurses report, approximately 400 of our regional nurses per annum migrated to Canada, the United Kingdom, and the USA. The cost of their training was estimated to be $5 to $20 million US per annum. We at home in the Cayman Islands are also feeling this sting, as educated Caymanians are coming back home but are unable to find jobs. I propose that we rekindle our education partnership and develop a strategy to send our expertise within the region where needed. However, we must make the consecutive effort to regulate wages so that our people are not disadvantaged. Otherwise, the effect would be that we rather import poverty than a quality workforce. Of course, the general approach is to impose tighter immigration controls as a countermeasure. In the face of such a tide, it is imperative that we develop our own individual strengths before we seek to fight against the negative aspects of globalization. Yes, globalization has made the existing disparities among CARICOM countries and associated members, like us in the Cayman Islands, more visible and transparent, as witnessed by the advancements of communication and telecommunications. Yet, for a world so interconnected by such technologies like social media, why do countries globally still fail to gain a real sense of each other? This was evident when the US President Barack Obama described Cayman as the biggest tax scam on record. Because we have a building that houses 12,000 corporations. Now, we realize his lack of understanding.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We realize his lack of understanding of asset managed vehicles that can move money around to avoid liabilities is a ploy. Because his homegrown state of Delaware houses 220,000. Instead, his accusations highlight the encroachment of globalization that we struggle with in our region, as smaller islands like us in the Cayman Islands constantly have to reinvent ourselves just to survive, let alone thrive. So far, we have moved from being experts in seafaring to becoming experts in finances. Indisputably, this move has definitely led to prosperity. Yet globalization becomes questionable when we do not operate on a level playing field, since relentless global malevolent forces impose restrictions and sanctions on us just because they can. Nonetheless, I strongly believe this globalization burden can be alleviated by boosting our economies internally. Let us then embrace private-public partnerships that can exist right at home, so that there is constant investment and reinvestment in our infrastructure. In the Cayman Islands, we're experimenting with such a model, and I am proud to say that it is working extremely well. With roads handling with road construction, hotels, upscale development, and community parks, to name a few. So I encourage all nations in our region to take action to face the effects of globalization by presenting a united front that speaks to our collective strengths and simultaneously upholds our individual uniqueness. I urge all nations to take notice of a meeting of British overseas territories on the 20th and 21st of July, which called for a redefining of their relationship with the UK to become more mutually beneficial. The Cayman Islands Premier Honorable Alden McLaughlin and other leaders of the overseas territories here sought better leverage when they proposed, Madam Speaker, you have to understand there is some left. Maybe 2 minutes extra, if I may.
You may have 30 seconds.
All right, good enough. Thank you, Miss. The Cayman Islands Premier Honorable Alden McLaughlin and other leaders of overseas territories here sought better leverage when they proposed that the territories utilize their individual strengths. BVI Premier Dr. D. Orlando Smith supported this position when he commented, our region is integral to the United Kingdom having a global presence. The political and economic reality of Brexit should bring into clear focus the value of overseas territories and our strategic position on security, trade, environment, and foreign affairs.
Honorable member, please take your seat. Thank you.
Just a bit.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the British Virgin Islands.
The Bahamas, Madam Speaker.
No, the British Virgin Islands, Monet James.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every reality starts with a vision. Where do I see myself in the next 15 years? What do I want to leave for my children, grandchildren, and future generations? These are similar questions that are on the minds of leaders all around the world. As the years go by, there must be progression towards a better way of life. My question today is, how as a region can we progress and preserve our island homes in the reality of globalization for many generations to come? The answer is quite simple. We need unity. Globalization is the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. Individually, each island cannot reap all the benefits that globalization has to offer. Therefore, we should move towards the unification of our islands. In other words, regional integration. Why such a move, you may ask? The facts are clear as day. Each island is too small, which means that resources are limited, and as a result, there are numerous losses in the trading industry. It makes sense to pool our resources together because as a unit, we'll be able to profit more. I know this regional integration sounds familiar to all of us, but I stand here boldly as a Caribbean youth of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to say that my fellow colleagues and I are tired of just talking. We want to see action. We are historically, culturally, politically, socially, and economically similar to each other. I see nothing wrong with us actually coming together so we can all lead a prosperous life, one where we are all economically and sound and self-sufficient. Now, this integration should not be mistaken for super government. Think of it as a partnership where we share our resources to obtain common goals. I am not saying to interfere with each island's cultural, social, and political climate. I am not saying to interfere with each island's unique way of generating income. What I am saying is that we can all share our resources to help strengthen and improve our island's sustainability through the channels of various economic pillars. Now, some of you may think that this regional integration has a chance of failing, but this does not have to be this way. Will each island represented here today follow through with what you say you will do? If we walk in together, we walk in together. My understanding from several political leaders is that we live in a time where once we get what we need, we forget to fulfill our end of the bargain. How can we ensure that these promises are fulfilled? Research has shown that from the 1950s, some of us in this region have been trying to integrate. And since the 1990s, we have been trying to combat globalization through integration. As a youth, I am concerned that regional leaders who sit at the table today have heard the same issues for years. I will go further. Leaders are meeting year after year in regional fora, making decisions and signing memoranda of understanding, but no follow-through. I am recommending a legally binding document, such as a multilateral agreement that governs our interrelationships. Failure to comply or fulfill duties will result in stiff penalties like fines or exclusion from partnerships and funding. Now is the time for us to get our act together now that globalization is trending. We need unity to progress. And most importantly, in order to navigate globalization in our way of interest, we need to ensure the growth of our people. A country's success or failure is dependent on the mental, social, and physical health of its people. We can achieve the goal of prosperity once our people are educated and in the best of health. With this integration, we should be able to foster relationships where as one unit, quality education geared towards each island's needs.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. And affordable health care for all is at the forefront. We need to all make this step in putting the people first. This is progression. This is preservation. This is unity in the midst of globalization. We are better together than divided. Why should we get outside help when we have each other? No one understands us better than our own people. We need to develop our own people instead and stop fattening the pockets of strangers whose only concern is the dollar sign. We truly need to invest in our own because we can be able to open the door to countless opportunities for them, which in turn will also benefit us all. I want you to leave here today remembering that together, everyone achieves more. It is time that we come together and take care of ourselves. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from Trinidad and Tobago, Joshua Phillip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, delegates. Good morning, members of the House. As the member of Trinidad and Tobago, I'll take a more economic approach because of our heavy business culture. And again, I would just like to reiterate the importance of the definition of globalization. Globalization is defined as, in the resolution, the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, we all know that we live in a big world, and oftentimes as small island nations, we see ourselves as being incapable of being able to produce our own goods and services. Sometimes, Madam Speaker, we look to the outside forces that we are now discussing here and condemning here for affecting our societies. We sometimes call them in to replace the lack of goods and services that we could have developed. Madam Speaker, therefore, I put forward for a new definition from a more economic point of view. Globalization is the tendency of investment funds and businesses to move beyond domestic and national markets to other markets around the globe, thereby increasing the interconnection of the world. Sir Arthur Lewis, as we all have learned in class, Madam Speaker, was a great St. Lucian economist. He put forward a theory known as industrialization by invitation. This theory was to replace the lack of funds that Caribbean nations were making. However, this theory put forward by Mr. Sir Arthur Lewis is the very theory that has created many of the problems in our region. We, as Caribbean nations, have called MNCs, which is multinational corporations, Madam Speaker, to come into our islands, to come into our countries. We give them tax holidays, we give them shelters, and we expect them to create employment. But, Madam Speaker, these MNCs only have their capitalist desires on their table. When we go forward in these negotiations, we need to ensure, Madam Speaker, that we as Caribbean people, we as small island nations have our interests on the table. For example, I believe Intel and Caribbean Data Services was a major communications company in Barbados. However, due to their unscrupulous capitalist desires, they left after their tax holiday and left many Bajan citizens unemployed and on the breadline. When we as Caribbean nations come forward on an international scale, we need to ensure that these big industries and these big corporations are going to consider the rights and the needs of our citizens. And I believe, thank you, and I believe I would disagree a little bit with the honorable member for the Bahamas, Mr. Carey. He stated that globalization affects our food security. I would honestly put forward, Mr. Carey, that the food security has become a problem because of our own foreign tastes, not because of globalization. We have the choice to choose when we go in a supermarket and we see a local product over a foreign product. We are the reason that creates...
Point of order, Madam Speaker. Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Honorable member, what is your point of order?
The honorable member stated that globalization has no effect on our food supply, and I firmly disagree. Because when you look at it, it's a mindset, and when we feel that we are inefficient to do certain things, then that's when we turn to other world powers in search of our needs. So I do believe that there's a direct correlation between globalization and our food supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith, the member for the Bahamas, but maybe I was incorrect by saying globalization did not have an effect, but I was wrong in that stance. It has an influence, but directly it is our choice that creates the food security problem. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have many supermarkets. We have a supermarket known as Massey Stores. When we go into the market, we oftentimes support more local foods over, more foreign foods, over local products. And we are the problem that creates that $4 billion gap in our food security bill.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Honorable member, what is your point of order?
Madam Speaker, directed to the honorable member from Trinidad, I would like to ask, does this happen on every small island state or just your small island state?
That question, honestly, is very invalid. It happens in all island states. What I was trying to point out, Mr. Honorable Member for the Bahamas, Mr. Carey.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
What is your point, member?
Does the honorable member have any research to support his claims?
Do you wish to respond?
Mr. Carey, you pointed out that Bahamas and many other islands have a food security problem. I'm just highlighting that it correlates directly with Trinidad's same problem. I'm just saying that since Trinidad is a large island compared to other small island nations in the Caribbean, compared to maybe Grenada or Dominica, we may have a greater food security bill gap. What I'm trying to say is that we need to support local. As the Honourable Member for the British Virgin Islands, Monet James, said, we need to stop supporting these MNCs over our local industries. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, KFC, a big transnational or multinational corporation came into Trinidad and Tobago. And we have our local fast food franchise known as Royal Castle. And when KFC came into Trinidad, they squeezed out many of the employees in Royal Castle, and Royal Castle was forced to increase their services and cut employment. So, on my perspective, globalization on an economic standpoint for us as small island nations is very detrimental to our societies. What we need to do is create a stronger union among us as CARICOM states. In spite of our differences, there are many political differences that we need to address in order to address the severe economic issues. We need to come together, put our insular differences aside, and come to form a more stronger union, as Mrs. James from the BVI stated. Now again, I do agree strongly with Mr. Jackson from a member for the Bahamas. He stated that there are major labor violations when these MNCs come forward. They do not have the interests of our citizens on the tables. We need to come together and form committees and organizations that will have our socioeconomic interests on the table and that will help our manufacturing industry in all CARICOM states, in all Caribbean nations to be strong. We need to stop seeing ourselves as small island nations. We need to stop seeing ourselves and limiting ourselves to the size of our geography. We need to push forward into the global market together as one unit, as one organization or committee or body, and fight for what we want.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Therefore, I put forward to have between clauses 7 and 8, I believe, be it further resolved that as a regional body, i.e. CARICOM, we hereby commit ourselves to the formation of committees and organizations to further the socio-economic interests of all member states in order to take full advantage of our domestic development and our manufacturing sectors. The number one solution also to implement to counteract the negative effects of globalization is a fair tax. When these corporations come in from the UK and from America, we give them preferential trade over our local manufacturers. Why do we do that? Why do we often support outside forces rather than support our internal ones? As my friend from the member of Bahamas told me, that sometimes we often sacrifice ourselves for paradise.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
What is your point, member?
Thank you. What exactly would he do about the associate members like us in the Cayman Islands?
Do you wish to respond, member?
Not really, but I will. Honourable member from the Cayman Islands, I suggest what I said was that we need to put our political differences aside. We need to stop. We shouldn't have external or associate members. We should have full members of CARICOM that are committed towards one common goal and one common cause. As I was saying, the honourable member from the Bahamas, she was telling me yesterday that a great Bahamian scholar, Ian Shaw, said that oftentimes we sacrifice paradise. We sacrifice ourselves to gain paradise. And oftentimes paradise is plantation. And as we all know, the plantation is slavery. We should not subject our citizens to the big MNCs and TNCs around the world so that they can make a profit while our citizens suffer. We need to ensure that their interests are on the table. And I say that we come into a stronger political, economic and social union and understand each other's differences so that we can be a force on a global scale.
What is your point, member?
The honorable member is continuously pointing out that other states come in and do these things, but how can they come in if the government does not allow them to? You need to look at it at both sides. You cannot just look at the United States and them making agreements with us. You have to look at us as well, because you're saying that they're making us slaves, but our own government is allowing them to come in and do these things.
You may continue.
Thank you, Honorable Member. That's what I'm pointing out. I am pointing out, thank you. I'm pointing out that our governments are the ones that do not consider the needs, that these, do not consider the capitalist
Point of order, Madam
ethos.
Speaker.
What is your point, member?
You say that you're pointing out, but you're continuously putting the focus on the foreigners that are coming into our countries. What I'm saying is you're not looking at us and how we allow them to come in and enslave us. You're continuously saying they come in, but they cannot come in if we do not allow them to.
Do you wish to respond?
Yes, Madam Speaker. What I'm saying is that we as a people and as our governments do not consider the capitalist ethos that these MNCs have, that these foreign companies have when they come in. When they come at the table, we, because of, as a scholar in Trinidad said, we, because of our plantation mindset, we adhere to their demands and do not consider demands of our own citizens. What I'm saying is that we need to come together, understand each other. We're not supposed to be the Caribbean and the Bahamas. We need to be the Caribbean nation. We need to be one Caribbean unit. We need to truly be CARICOM in order to be a force on a global scale. Because together we can aspire, together we can achieve. We can better healthcare. We can have better healthcare, we can have better economies, and we can strengthen one another. Madam Speaker, I beg to have at least 30 seconds remaining.
You may.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When we come together, we can have a stronger union. We can have... Madam Speaker, we can come together and we can have a stronger union, and we can have better healthcare for our citizens, and we can have a better society for the generation tomorrow. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, J.L. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, globalization has been changing the face of this earth as far as the 19th century, where Great Britain became the first global economic superpower because of superior manufacturing, technology, and improved global communications. It was before that time and since after that cultures, ideas, goods, and resources spread from country to country in the attempt to create an all-inclusive world. Although the world is slowly but surely progressing to a state of complete inclusiveness, Madam Speaker, for us, for my home, and for your home, Madam Speaker, this state of inclusiveness is showing to be extremely difficult to achieve. Globalization has already impacted the economies and societies of the Caribbean, and with the current pace of technological and other changes, its effects will intensify. Madam Speaker, our Caribbean states are vulnerable to the negative effects of globalization, making us prone to encountering economic shocks. Some of these would include, we cannot influence the international prices of our exports. We're relying heavily on taxes on international trade to generate revenue. Relatively high transportation costs has caused a loss of competitiveness. It's causing poverty, Madam Speaker, spreads of unemployment, encourages economic inequality, limited institutional capability within both the public and private sectors, remoteness. We're lying outside of established trading routes, making international transportation very costly. Proneness to natural disasters, environmental fragility, high export dependence, and particularly dependence on a small number of exports and a limited number of markets. And lastly, high import dependence, including dependence on imported energy. Additionally, because of the openness of these economies, Madam Speaker, we will continue to be vulnerable to terms of trade and other shocks from the external environment. For example, the region's vulnerability to oil shocks will continue and will likely intensify as a result of strong energy demand arising from robust economic growth in China and India. Madam Speaker, another important weakness is the limited technological capacity of the region as shown by the low rate of innovation and by its inability to adapt to new technologies. Given the fact, Madam Speaker, that globalization is largely technology-driven, this is a significant weakness, and the region will have to take substantial initiatives to address this deficiency. The Caribbean will have to emphasize math, Madam Speaker, science, and technology training at all levels in the education system. The creation of a comprehensive strategy for technological development in the region is absolutely necessary, Madam Speaker, and long overdue. Given all of the above-mentioned vulnerabilities, Patrick Kendall stated, integration into the world economy on the basis of competitiveness seems a daunting task. Madam Speaker, clearly, some of the vulnerabilities, such as a small resource base or weakness to natural disasters, have remained and will remain with globalization. In other cases, however, the opportunity now exists to address at least somewhat these vulnerabilities and thus reduce their constraining effect on growth and development. Madam Speaker, Thomas Friedman stated, if you can't see the world and you can't see the interactions that are shaping the world, you surely cannot strategize about the world. And if you are going to deal with a system as complex and as brutal as globalization and prosper within it, you need a strategy for how to choose prosperity for your own country and your company. What is our strategy, Madam Speaker? Given its complexity, its potentially disruptive power together with its opportunities, there is clearly immense need to understand it, to take advantage of whatever benefits it offers, and to minimize potentially negative outcomes. This, however, will not be possible without an understanding of globalization, which is shaping and will continue to shape our lives in the Caribbean and the rest of the world. Madam Speaker, globalization is something we can't stop, but we can strategize and create policies in efforts to create an even-handed atmosphere within globalization. I say, let us all look to our strengths as small states in the Caribbean, the America, and the Atlantic region, and let us hold on to them. Let us mold them and utilize them, Madam Speaker, to its full potential. The Caribbean...
Honourable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Caribbean has several advantages or strengths in regards to globalization. Amongst these is the fact that the region is democratic, adheres to a system of laws, has embraced economic liberalism. The Caribbean has a relatively high level of education compared with other less developed countries, Madam Speaker. It is also English-speaking and geographically close to the U.S., the largest single market in the world. As pointed out in 2004 by the United Nations, English is still the dominant language in the modern globalization. Unfortunately, English is an asset which the Caribbean does not fully exploit. Further, Paget Henry advocates that in this current phase of globalization, Madam Speaker, there needs to be a turn towards the Caribbean's indigenous products, our music, our food, land, beaches, territorial space, capacities for learning and creative self-transformation. What should be taken from this suggestion, Madam Speaker, is that the culture of the Caribbean is important for continuous, locally centered economic development. It is important, therefore, that the region understand the character and dynamics of globalization, Madam Speaker, so as to ensure an appropriate response to it. Globalization is not a process that is motionless. It will keep evolving, and so must the regional response. Madam Speaker, this resolution is nothing to procrastinate with. I ask that you take in the urgency of the need for us to strategize, for the prosperity of our countries are at stake. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many The chair recognizes the honorable member from Bermuda, Kamika Johnson.
Globalization, as I said, is one of the most important topics being discussed economically and politically today. It is the idea of slowly shifting to a fully integrated world where all countries cooperate with each other in politics, cultural values, knowledge, and economics. Hence why today we discuss the topic on globalization and sovereignty of small states. Yes, many paint this glorious picture of globalization and its benefits. However, the reality is that it brings several economic, cultural, and political cons that affect every one of us. The problem we see is not that everyone gets an equal share of the benefits of globalization. Most of the time, the proportion of the society that actually benefits or receives the most profits of globalization is relatively small. Additionally, Madam Speaker, we've recognized that some people increase their income in a very rapid pace, while others stay in the current condition or begin to change in a very slow pace, increasing the gap between the have and the have-nots. The problem of inequality is a major criticism of the consequences of a globalized world. Many countries are experiencing a growing economic gap. Technology has a part to play in this, as the rapid technology development is leaving developing countries and some small countries behind. People around the world are not able to catch up with the constant advancements in this technological community. This has an impact on the social, political, and economic development of countries. In essence, those who are able to develop within the technological era actualize themselves and will progress. And those that are slow to advance in this area can suffer. However, it is the government's responsibility to ensure that they govern to advance all of its people. Madam Speaker, given such, globalization has its pros and cons, and as stated earlier, is a fundamental in the world today. Thus, what I believe is required is that each country strengthen their cultural identity and principles for the development in an ever-changing world. I propose that we focus on building our cultural heritage such that the principles and cultural values will guide us as we embrace globalization. Culture affects the way we think, and thus economics is related because economics is how you act. Because we act based on what we think, culturalism becomes a critical factor as it's the principles and foundations that identifies countries. We can partner with other islands, yet still we can identify Bermudians, Trinidadians, Bahamians, and so on. Even though we are impacted by globalization, it's the culture that makes Bermuda, Bermuda, Trinidad, Trinidad, and Bahamas, the Bahamas. Soca originated from Trinidad, however, we all have embraced it in our environments. Once you understand and appreciate other people's cultural backgrounds, then you can also connect with them more, building partnerships to ensure the betterment of society. Madam Speaker, Bermuda is small in physical size, but has a significant position on the world stage in terms of the reinsurance and insurance industry. We utilized our strategic position and rigorous standard to build a world-class infrastructure that has put Bermuda on the map. The government must continue to balance the impact of globalization whilst maintaining the strengths that led us to become a major benefactor in the reinsurance industry, such that it ensures that all its people prosper and our country lies at the root of our economic development. Setting this political philosophy is what allows for intellectual growth and creativity to occur within states. Being culturally in tune is aligned for a sense of economic growth. The distinction of people comes from culture. Being a youth today in this modern society, we are well aware of the advancements in internet-based tools such as social networking sites. Although technology is a driven factor in the process of globalization, reducing certain barriers, culturalism is what I believe allows us to think and function globally, increasing our ability to access information and our economic potential. Madam Speaker, essentially what I am proposing is using culture as a method. The way we think is based on our culture. Economics is how we act. However, we act according to how we think, so it links right back to culture.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Principally, the question posed is how do you build your culture for the future generations as you interact and partner with the world through globalization? Today, I come from the viewpoint that globalization offers the potential to enhance the world culturally. The notion that the opportunities for cultural exchange brought about by globalization assist with promoting broad-mindedness and diversity. The vision is the multicultural, inclusive community where ideas can be freely exchanged and appreciated. The goal is not to build culturalism to reject globalization, but to build it in such a way that we think and act globally. We don't wish to erode the principles of the state. With our united stance, we must create a kind of globalization that works for everyone and not just for a few. The kind that broadens and deepens the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the CPA's economy into a worldwide market for goods, services, and capital. Ultimately, the objective is to maintain and safeguard the unique cultural identity, economic interests, and sovereignty of each island state. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Gabrielle Colley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to begin with a quote by Mr. Mike Collins, and it goes like this. Globalization provides poor countries through infusions of foreign capital and technology with a chance to develop economically, and by spreading prosperity creates conditions in which democracy and respect for human rights may flourish, end quote. This is described as an ethereal goal not yet achieved by most countries. And if that point is not disappointing enough to hear from a process that is bragged about as being the jack of all trades, then it mustn't be any more disappointing to learn that inequality levels have been increased by the introduction of new technology and the investment of foreign capital in developing countries, according to the IMF. Madam Speaker, allow me to pose these questions. How long till the people become important? Better yet, how long till the people become more important than the prosperity? After all, how good is a nation without its people? What is a nation without its people? Madam Speaker, according to the aforementioned article, competition between countries is supposed to drive prices down. Why then has the Bahamas implemented a form of taxation on the Bahamian people if globalization is so driven by free trade? This means then that Bahamians are now burdened with an already increased price due to customs implications, as well as the now value-added tax, which, to be frank, is benefiting the government in every way possible. Madam Speaker, using these tactics to pay off countries who we have so-called relationships with. It is impossible for me to say that globalization is an entirely horrible scheme. Just look at larger countries like the United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. One of the most globalized countries in the world, one might say. It is no wonder why they have no distinct culture. It's just like drawing a line in different colors on top of each other. Eventually, that line becomes brown and unappealing. None of the colors can be detected anymore. But just look at them. On top of the world, one might say. It is often said that when America sneezes, everyone catches the cold. In smaller island states like those in the West Indian region, it is unfathomable to imagine how one country, such as the aforementioned, can be plagued with such illnesses stemming from the road to the American dream upon which globalization acts as a stepping stone. Madam Speaker, according to the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, 8.3 million Americans are on psychiatric drugs as we speak. To me, this sounds like torture, a prime example of an undeveloped country. Ironic as it seems, the implications of globalization in the United States over the past 20 years has deemed them developed. But what about the people? Madam Speaker, I have come to the realization that globalization is something we simply cannot stop. It is already going on and has been for longer than we may think. According to an article in the Nassau Guardian on February 18th of 2014, it was understood that as of 2013, the Bahamas Electricity Corporation essentially became up for grabs, with bidders including the Malaysian-based Genting Group, China State Construction and Engineering Corporation, Cayman-based InterEnergy, US-based Power Secure, and Caribbean Power Partners. Expectantly, in February of 2016, BC was sold to American-based Power Secure for $431 million. Described by Caribbean News Now as the hopeful successor to compensate for the downfall of the Baha Mar project. If you ask me, we're doing this whole globalization thing entirely wrong, completely selling what we worked extremely hard to build and what was still in the process of growing and becoming better. It is essentially like selling the recipe for a native dish to a foreign country and having them build an entire franchise off of it, like the notable Bahamian restaurant Bamboo Shack. Making loads of money off of what we built.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Jobs have been lost, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I propose that our island states develop themselves first, because no matter how independent we may see ourselves, it is true what the resolution states, that we have only recently begun to enjoy the strengthening of our democratic institutions. How can we begin to take a united stance against the negative aspects of the encroachment of globalization if we as small island states have barely developed any stance at all? We have our own water supply, we produce our own fruits, perfectly capable of canning and bottling fresh foods from the source. We have fashion designers and seamstresses, the list goes on, Madam Speaker. So I leave you with this to think on. Why not grow ourselves to 100% before splitting our 50? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the British Virgin Islands, Martha Henry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The resolution here today is one of great importance. With the advancement of technology, it is important that we address the effects of globalization on these small island states of this region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. So what is globalization? It may seem like a relatively new term, but it dates back to the time when our ancestors moved out of Africa to spread all over the globe. It then developed into cooperations, trading in areas that were miles apart, such as through the Silk Road that connected China and Europe during the Middle Ages. 21st century globalization now focuses on worldwide economic, financial, trade, and communications integration. It greatly impacts the environmental, cultural, social, political, and economic climate in societies around the world. Although globalization encourages global togetherness, its repercussions will negatively affect these small island states. Just like there are 7 deadly sins, there are 7 sins of globalization. These 7 sins of globalization: alienation, selective action, marginalization, colonial flavor, imposition, assault on sovereignty, and loss of identity are from Petru Dumitriu's article, The 7 Sins of Globalization, A Perspective from Small Developing States. I have interpreted 3 of these 7 deadly sins of globalization based on research and the importance on this motion. Alienation is being isolated from others or being prohibited from taking part in aspects of society in which you are allowed to participate. This region is prone to be alienated in terms of trading. In addition to being famous vacation destinations, our islands export bananas, sugar, rum, fuel and mining products, minerals, iron ore products, and fertilizers. With the world shifting towards worldwide integration, the demands of globalization on the export industry will become too tumultuous for these small island states to produce, resulting in quotas. This will cause it to not be met, and the larger countries and companies will end up finding other suppliers who can keep up with their needs. If our most valuable buyers are no longer interested in our business, the isolation from the export industry will pose a threat to our economy. Sovereignty is the authority of a state to govern itself. The majority of small island states are independent. Only a few are still dependent territories, but they are somewhat self-governing. Globalization will assault all island sovereignty. With worldwide integration, national borders will no longer exist, and both our economic and financial geography will no longer coincide with all political processes. This means that our governments will no longer be in complete control of our own trade. Globalization's all-access pass will bring about increased criminal activities such as drug trafficking, money laundering, and terrorism. Its effect on our sovereignty is like Triton's trident. It will affect us economically, politically, and socially. It would hinder the progression of our islands that we have worked on immensely. Identity makes us unique. It sets us apart from the rest. Our islands will lose its identity to the hands of globalization. Its aim is to solve the entire human race by improving all aspects of life. This seems commendable, but the way in which it is to be done will erase our very own existence. We will be forced to adopt new cultural values that are based on the irrational patterns of the rich countries through mass media. These values will become universal and put all culture and values on the back burner since globalization calls for the world to be fully uniformed. Our ancestors had to conform to the ways of the Europeans, and we refuse to conform again to the ways of the world in the name of globalization. We refuse for globalization to strip away the past that made us who we are.
Honourable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We refuse for globalization to eradicate our ways of life. This unique melting pot culture, which includes our tasty foods, our own music and dance, and most importantly, our diverse accents and dialects. We refuse for globalization to take over and give outsiders access to purchase or be in control of what we have fought so hard to own. I am fearful that all future generations will never be able to appreciate our past and present because they will be blinded by the ways of this new world created by the worldwide integration. As small island states, we cannot get rid of globalization, but we would like for it to be structured in a way in which we can benefit. Globalization should allow us to establish shared ways to preserve human life. It should allow us to develop a model of interaction between nations who have various cultures, values, and belief systems. It is our duty to make sure that the predicted evils of globalization do not make living on earth worse than it is already. It is our duty to make sure that our legacy lives on. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from the Bahamas, Cameron Johnson. Reckley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in order to fully understand the meaning of the word globalization, let us first dissect this word into two smaller words. We can look at the words global and organization. Global as relating to or involving the entire world. Not just one country, Madam Speaker, or one continent, but the entire world. We can look at the word organization, a systemized group of people with a particular purpose, such as business or government. Madam Speaker, now we can take a direct look at the word globalization. This refers to the free flow of capital, labor, technology, commodity across national boundaries. It is a process of interaction and integration among individuals and nations of the world for the purpose of economic growth. Madam Speaker, globalization has made the concept of comparative advantage more relevant than ever. Madam Speaker, comparative advantage is defined as a country's ability to produce good or service more efficiently and inexpensively than the other country. Some of the factors that influence comparative advantage include cost of labor, capital, national resources, and geographical location, and also workforce productivity. Madam Speaker, globalization has brought the world together by encouraging more trade among nations, more open financial institutions, a greater flow of investment capital across international borders. Madam Speaker, less developed countries have benefited from globalization by leveraging their comparative advantage in labor costs. As a result, Madam Speaker, some developing countries have been able to progress more quickly, have been able to quickly develop jobs, educational attainment, and growth of infrastructure. Madam Speaker, a German company can produce cars in Argentina and sell these same cars in the United States. Madam Speaker, a Bahamian woman can grow pineapples in her backyard and export these same pineapples to other countries. Madam Speaker, this is globalization. Everyone has an opportunity, Madam Speaker. I didn't say everybody wins, but everyone has an opportunity. Every country has its strengths and weaknesses when it comes to export and imports. Madam Speaker, product quality is another advantage of globalization. The onset of international trade has given rise to intense competition in the markets. No longer does one find a limited number of commodities available. A particular commodity may fetch hundreds of options with different prices. The product, Madam Speaker, has been enhanced so as to retain customers. Today, customers comprise with the price range, but not with the quality of the product. Expanding knowledge on foreign cultures. Madam Speaker, some of us have heard the phrase, each one, teach one. Recently, I learned a lot from Trinidad. I learned a lot from Bermuda. People from all over the world have access to communicate freely with one another. This is helping breaking down cultural barriers, Madam Speaker. Gaining a better understanding of how people around the world lives is a key point to globalization, Madam Speaker. I see globalization as a challenge we should invite and we should embrace. Ethan Zuckerman said, the benefits and consequences of globalization have a great deal to do with whether we're intelligent or whether we're thoughtful of how we approach globalization, or whether we're just blindly accepting or blindly resisting.
Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I quote John F. Kennedy in saying, change is the law of life. Who look to the past, or if you look to the present, you are certain to miss the future. Madam Speaker, globalization is our future. It is time for us to embrace it. It is time for us to accept it, and it's time for us to realize that this is what we need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member from the British Virgin Islands, Rashawn Malone.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The concept of globalization has existed for decades. According to the Oxford Dictionary, it is the process by which businesses or other organizations develop international influence or start operating on an international scale. It implies we are not citizens of individual countries, but all a part of a global one, the planet Earth. With economic and political relations in our world being very uneven, there is a power imbalance, and there is therefore a limit to how well countries can be interconnected. How do we expect to counter the negative aspects of globalization when the positive benefits are automatically accompanied by said negative aspects? These negatives are already present and prevalent right here in the region. Don't believe me? Then take a trip to one of the bigger supermarkets near your home. Minister of Agriculture in Guyana, Dr. Leslie Ramsamy, estimated during the main address at the launch of CXC for Agricultural Science in May 2014 that the region was likely to import more than $5.5 billion in food products that year, while only $1.5 billion in similar products were expected to be exported. This means that 3.5 times more food would have been imported into the region than what would be exported. Imagine 80% of the food in the region is imported from the United States, where our diets primarily consisted of the foods we produced ourselves. They now consist of starchy, sugary processed foods, which are downright toxic to our bodies. We live in the age where genetically modified foods are becoming the norm. To prevent disease among crops or even food-producing animals, farmers are injecting various chemicals to enhance growth and ensure longer shelf lives for these foods. For example, to increase growth and promote weight gain in cows, as well as to increase their milk production, they are injected with a hormone known as the synthetic bovine growth hormone, produced from modified E. coli bacteria. What is even more troubling is that the use of these various growth hormones cause the rapid development of the animal and also makes them susceptible to various illnesses and infections. To solve this problem, they came up with a brilliant solution to use antibiotics to treat, reduce, or prevent these animals from becoming sick. The use of these antibiotics eliminates the majority of the bacteria present in the animal's body. The ones that remain, however, are ones that have built up a resistance to the antibiotics, which then begin multiplying into more bacteria that also carry this resistance. Even after being killed, they remain in the flesh of the animal, and when not handled or cooked properly, these resistant bacteria can spread to us humans. Simple enough solution: cook your food properly, or so you might think. As stated by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the resistant bacteria reside primarily in the stomach of the animal, and when its feces is used in fertilizers on food crops, these resistant bacteria spread to the crops which we import, purchase, and then consume. This can cause us to develop a resistance to certain antibiotics, and more importantly, makes us targets of antibiotic-resistant infections. Some examples of such infections include Salmonella, Streptococcus, and E. coli. There have been over 2,049,442 illnesses caused by antibiotic resistance and over 23,000 deaths. The Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has approved the use of antibiotics in the treatment, control, and prevention on animals that are sick. A chemical company by the name of Monsanto is the mastermind behind a few of the growth hormones used in food-producing animals. This company was also responsible for the creation...
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Honorable member, what is your point of order?
Honorable member, are you just suggesting that growth hormones are the only reason that we're getting sick from eating certain foods? Because I don't know if you know, but beans, kidney beans, as well as pork chops produce a certain bacteria that you have to cook the meat and the beans thoroughly, or else you would get infected from the bacteria that is naturally occurring in that food.
Honorable member, do you wish to respond?
Yes, I do. But these bacteria, some of them automatically have a resistance. So when you use the antibiotics and the hormones, they don't die. They just stay there and they multiply.
Okay, you may continue.
Wait.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
What is your point, member?
She was, the member over there, she was not referring to them surviving antibiotics. She was referring to them being cooked properly. What do you say to that? The pork chops that are naturally imbued with these bacteriums. What do you say to that?
As well as beans.
Yes, as well as beans, as you said.
Do you wish to respond, member?
On a point of order, Madam Speaker.
What is your point, member?
Just to the delegates, the members of the Cayman Islands, and to Mrs. Smith of the Bahamas, that is not the issue at hand. Don't be pedantic, please. Could the honourable member please get time to develop his speech and contribute to the resolution without unnecessary disturbances?
Another point of order, Madam Speaker. It wasn't I that presented that point of order.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, Mrs. Colley, I meant. Sorry, Madam Speaker.
Just a point of order over his point of order. I waited until he got over what he was saying. So he was already at the end, which is why he could have told me that he already went over that. Thank you.
Honorable member, do you care to respond to all of those points?
No, ma'am.
Okay. You may continue.
This company was also responsible for the creation of an artificial sweetener called aspartame. Aspartame is very toxic and highly addictive and is found in many processed foods we import.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Diet Coke, iced tea, instant cocoa mix, pudding, nutritional bars, and the list goes on. The FDA has approved aspartame to be used in products once the amount is 12 milligrams or less. But due to the highly addictive property of the chemical, it is not difficult to intake more than that amount quite easily. Problems that this chemical causes include, but are not limited to, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and I could go on. By now, we should all be starting to see parts of the bigger problem. Now for the end result. In our Commonwealth region, we are plagued by chronic non-communicable diseases, or NCDs for short. The ones of most concern are heart disease, stroke, various forms of cancer, as well as diabetes and chronic respiratory diseases. NCDs are the leading cause of premature mortality, accounting for nearly half of all deaths of persons less than 70 years, and for 2 out of 3 deaths overall. According to the Pan American Health Organization, NCDs represent a high cost to society, including individuals and families. Before we can discuss regional and trade agreements on the issue of food security, I suggest that each island state review existing policies or enact new ones to restrict or limit the types of imported foods entering their countries from outside of the region. Regional policies to restrict or limit imported foods can then be discussed. More emphasis can then be placed on regional trade agreements to encourage trade across the Commonwealth region and potentially encourage the reinstitutionalization of subsistence farming. Madam Speaker, I beg thee 30 more seconds.
You may.
We are here today debating an issue that affects the future of us, the youth of this region. But this conversation about globalization is no recent development. Leaders, it is time to move forward. Stop telling us what you plan to do. We want to see action to mitigate against the negative effects of globalization. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Megan Curry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, globalization has been described as the theme of our contemporary discussion. Globalization encompasses so many aspects of our daily lives that at times we can become unaware of its omnipresence. Its arms touch, concern, and affect all nations. Like many concepts, Madam Speaker, globalization has two faces. One face unites the world and sustains relationships. This face gives the expression of hope as globalization creates opportunity and introduces market variety. It boasts of promoting democratic values, respect for human rights, and tolerance. The other face of globalization, Madam Speaker, smirks, as it knowingly exploits lesser developed nations, all the while hiding its manipulation by inflating its positive effects and creating dependency. This face, Madam Speaker, is a cause of economic inequality among nations. And while it is argued that globalization creates employment, I challenge you, Madam Speaker, to really assess whether or not this statement is true. Isn't it more accurate to say that globalization merely relocates employment? While it is true that societies do benefit from job creation, are these created jobs truly for their benefit, or do they really exploit their labor? Madam Speaker, I wish to further my discussion on the environment. Globalization has been good for our nations in that it has brought awareness to the importance of developing a sustainable environment. This is evidenced by international conventions and conferences dedicated to the cause, such as the Kyoto Protocol, the United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development, and international commitments like the Carbon War Room Initiative. The environment, Madam Speaker, is a world problem. But we, as a region, are particularly affected by the consequences of its ill treatment. Even if we produce fairly small amounts of greenhouse gases, we are the first to suffer under the global climate change and its resulting rise in sea level. In this, Madam Speaker, globalization patterns become very visible. 8 world-ruling countries make the main global decisions, but the entire globe, consisting of some 195 nations, are affected. We, as a region, effectively have no say in global, life-altering decisions. Usually, globalization is centered on culture and brain drain. While these are important issues, the effects that globalization has on the environment are akin to those of a deadly, slow illness. Natural disasters, which are intensified and made less predictable through climate change, are the ultimate threat to small island developing states. From 1990 to 2008, the Caribbean experienced 165 natural disasters. The total loss and damage for this period was estimated at US $136 billion. The Red Cross has estimated that more than 700,000 people in the Caribbean are affected by disasters annually, making it one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. We need not think too far to remember the disastrous earthquake in Haiti in 2010, or even the heart-wrenching effects of Tropical Storm Erika in Dominica last year. The vast majority of our economies are built primarily on tourism. We have been blessed with vacation meccas as our home. Our natural resources are what draw investors, tourists, and second home owners to our shores. Yet, our environment, the very thing that has brought us great prosperity, is the first thing that we alter in an effort to boost the tourism that sustains us. In its natural state, has it not brought us much prosperity? Economic development is critical in securing employment and improving infrastructure. But, Madam Speaker, at what cost? Madam Speaker, economic profit can only be produced by a stable environmental foundation. Sustainability cannot be achieved unless our legislatures enact laws to secure this aim. As regions built on tourism, we must propel it forward and have the foresight to sustain and further diversify it. Environmental stability cannot be achieved when we do not demand of our investors that proper and legitimate environmental impact assessments are completed prior to the commencement of a project. It cannot be achieved if we do not punish the abandonment of anchor projects when all of the environmental modifications—
Honourable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And oftentimes, irreversible damage has already been done. Environmental and thus economic stability cannot be achieved if a nation's citizenry are not aware of the underlying detriments of a seemingly perfect economy-stimulating endeavor. Madam Speaker, it is because of unchecked globalization that we have epic economic and social suicide incidents such as the abandoned Four Seasons resorts in Barbados and Bahama and Bimini Bay projects in the Bahamas. Incidents like the potential loss of a great world wonder, Lighthouse Point in southern Eleuthera, the Bahamas. The destruction of such fragile ecosystems jeopardize our industry's important ecosystems and livelihoods. Madam Speaker, the people are wanting more. An Eleuthera native told the Tribune newspaper, "There were many major developments on Eleuthera, and as economic hard times came upon us, the investors left. It is time for eco-friendly investments that will include the residents and descendants of Eleuthera." Madam Speaker, globalization is not a bad thing. Rather, unchecked, ungovernable globalization is what becomes a grave issue. It is no secret that island states have to fight a battle within an unfair competition, given our inherent vulnerabilities. But armed with this knowledge, we must become aware of our weaknesses and reshape them into strengths. Let us effectively govern globalization by creating and enforcing legislation with foresight. Let us be proactive in seeking out mitigation efforts. And finally, let us take advantage of the links that we have already forged between ourselves, support each other's industry, and actively inform our citizenry of the two faces of what has the potential to be a very good thing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from the Bahamas, Jerron Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for acknowledging me so that I can give my contribution. Madam Speaker, if we look around the world today, we would realize that nothing is the same as though it was 20 years ago. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus. Madam Speaker, globalization101.org has defined this global phenomenon as the acceleration, intensification, and economic interaction of people, companies, and governments around the world. Madam Speaker, globalization has been here, and it will remain, causing our world to change faster than a speeding bullet. For some, it brings positive effects. For others, negative effects. But we need to find a way to embrace the positive and manipulate the negative so that it works in our favor. But in order to see globalization, we must see it in its entirety. Imagine seeing a beautiful used car. To anyone, the car is simply eye candy. But no one would take the chance to drive that car until they analyze the Carfax. Madam Speaker, globalization is this beautiful used car. But some would not take the chance to analyze the Carfax because they're simply blinded and overwhelmed as to what comes with it, such as global economic growth, expansion of technology, the breaking down of trade barriers. This all sounds good, but at what cost? Madam Speaker, if one were to check the interior of this global movement, they would realize who or what is making this engine run. The International Labour Organization has shown that there are approximately 168 million children under the age of 15 that go to work instead of going to school. More than half of them, approximately 85 million, are indulged in hazardous work. Madam Speaker, we seem not to care about who is doing the work or the situation of the working conditions. We just want the work to be done so that globalization can be successful. Madam Speaker, are you aware that there are approximately 1.4 billion people that go to work each day earning a salary of $2 a day under terrible working conditions and poor treatment? But we would never know that because it's all hidden behind the tall fence of capitalism. Madam Speaker, according to Michael H. Alderman, the U.S. Labor Department estimated that 7% of the single working adult in the United States were living below the poverty line in 2009, and it has not changed much since. When the honorable member from the Virgin Islands said that we are dependent on the U.S., I totally agree. And as Gabrielle Corley from the Bahamas said, when the United States sneezes, everyone catches the cold. But I would take that a bit further to say, when the United States sneezes, Europe or Japan may catch the cold. But the countries in the Americas, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic region, we certainly do catch pneumonia. Madam Speaker, do you think that we are ready to deal with a case of pneumonia? Because this pneumonia would come in and basically destroy the working class of these countries. Countries that were built off the working class. That would simply be like taking the limestone from under this great country, taking the limestone from under Barbados, and simply tearing it apart. Our country would certainly fall. Negative globalization has led to the deindustrialization of developed countries, such as the United States. Madam Speaker, if the large countries cannot withstand its immense power, then it is unfeasible for the smaller countries to withstand its power. Madam Speaker, when the industries are break down, it would lead to a decline and ultimately a deficit. When the deficit arrives, the government would have to be forced to borrow money from outside sources, which is referred to as a bailout. And as a protective measure, the government would then have to go and resort to diminishing the people by implementing a system that we have seen in the G20 countries known as a bail-in. Madam Speaker, this is where the personal funds in your bank account, or 16 to 20% of the assets weighed for risk, can be taken and replaced with government treasury bonds so that they can defray the cost of the country. Once again, if we diminish the people, how can we survive? Globalization is a derivative of the term global, which means covering or relating to...
2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Globalization is a derivative of the term global, which means covering or relating to the whole world. The open acceptance of negative globalization would cause countries to lose their identity. Your national identity would simply be diminished or covered up with terms such as all-world citizen or international citizen. People from all over the world would have free entrance into your countries, subsequently bringing their cultures and their values and norms with them. At this point, your country then loses its authenticity and would absorb the norms and the values of the other countries. Therefore, we would have an integrated society, and drastic changes would have to be made in order to accommodate the norms and the values of the other countries. At some point, our native festivals, such as the Trinidad Carnival or the Bahamas Junkanoo, would lose its indelible mark, or our native dishes would also lose its indelible mark because it would simply be watered down or changed. Madam Speaker, at some point, if these changes get to a high point, we may even have to change our constitution to conform to the norms and values of these people. Madam Speaker, globalization has two faces. one that brings all the positive effects and one that entails the negative. But if we decide to put a leash on this beast of globalization by putting proper guidelines, stipulations in place, the countries in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region would be able to absorb the tremendous blows and sustain itself during this transition into globalization. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Globalization, defined by some as the economic equivalent of a natural force, or a sort of trend that has swept the globe. Regardless, it has shrunk the world to a size small through the process of international integration. However, Madam Speaker, why does it seem that small island states of the CPA are seemingly getting left behind in the drive of globalization compared to North America and Europe? It may have to do with our small size, limited access to resources, whether it be financial or technological, or the inequity of the international trading regime. Globalization has made us more vulnerable as a region. Having created an interlocking world, it has made us painfully aware of our limitations, but it drives us to overcome these challenges and keep moving forward. Firstly, in terms of economic globalization, though free trade is not new to the Caribbean, the increased major competition and opening of new world markets are now realities we have to face. No one island can take on the global market by themselves. Facing superpowers such as the US and China, these attempts are futile. Now, whereas the saying goes that two heads are better than one, what about 18? If we, as the nations of the CPA, came together and strengthened our economic union to counteract these negative consequences of globalization, encouraging greater interregional trade, we can see change. Also, with increased trade, the challenge of identifying and exploiting new and dynamic trading opportunities presents itself. The Commonwealth Secretariat and World Bank Joint Task Force of Small States' final report stated, export opportunities, mainly in the service sector, such as tourism, financial services, software development, etc., has shown greater dynamicism than merchandise trade. Now let's take it even further. I encourage the young minds of our times and times to come to take great interest in development of different sectors in their nation. We are plagued by the problem of brain drain, where our young minds are leaving our countries and develop others instead of their own. Many say it is because they believe their country is not moving towards developing their field of interest. But what is wrong with starting up that field of interest in your own country? Secondly, in terms of cultural globalization, we are blessed with technology which enables a greater amount of understanding and research of different cultures, including our own. However, a major concern would be the westernization of our nations, along with the depletion of distinct, smaller cultures of our countries. The cultural identity of each nation is of great importance, and each country should do its best to ensure that it is not only maintained, but also developed. Sea, sun, and sand is not all that we have to offer. I'm sure that each of us can boast about some cultural aspect that is unique to each of our nations, and that is okay. In fact, that is great. Having a unique cultural identity to each island is something not only to share with yourselves, but with the region and with the world. For example, Trinidad and Tobago, we are proud of our calypso and soca music, which has been increasing in popularity not only in the region, but in other countries internationally. It started with the likes of Lord Kitchener, Henry Belafonte, and the Mighty Sparrow. It is continuing with the likes of Marshall Montano and Bunji Garling, and in the future, the likes of Aaron Duncan. It is the focus on preserving our heritage and developing our unique cultural aspect, not only for our generation, but for generations to come. We tend to have this perception that whatever foreign is better, but I'm here to tell you what is yours is your own, and take pride in that. Finally, in terms of political globalization, we are not far behind in terms of our democracy. Each of these states revel in their own sovereignty. However, when referring to small island states, globalization requires a lot more of our governments nowadays. Our vision must, one might say, the vision must be larger. No one government can rebuke the inevitable change that comes with globalization. However, a single government can make decisions.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. However, a single government can make decisions of how to integrate globalization and use it to our benefits. For example, once again, I am from Trinidad, so I will use it as an example. We seek to move forward through encouragement of education for all in both vocational and academic fields. The goal, you may ask, is to create an empowered nation of citizens to further drive our nation in the future in the right direction of both economic, political, and intellectual gain. However, more can be done. In fact, among these states, there should be a greater solidarity among our universities in the Caribbean and raise the standard of education among us to benefit ourselves and to share with the world. Vision 2020 was a 15-year strategic plan which was put forward by the late former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Patrick Manning. It was created to drive Trinidad and Tobago in the direction of development in the era of globalization. A vision for the future that we today are still reaping the benefits of. So I pose to the honorable members here today, let us have a vision for the future to drive this region towards globalization. See, the question is not how do we survive these negative effects of globalization, but rather the question is how do we thrive in the era of globalization? To answer this, I leave you with the words of Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is a progress, and working together is success. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Ashley McLean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Bahamas stands trembling on the verge of globalization, like a swimmer, afraid to dive into the deep, cold ocean. And rightly so, as the Bahamas is aware of the extreme temperature of the water and knows that if she cannot swim, she will surely sink. Of course she does not want to sink, Madam Speaker. I know I do not want to sink. And sink the Bahamas will if it sits obliviously by welcoming globalization with open arms. Rather than open arms, Madam Speaker, the Bahamas should greet globalization with a handshake. Thereafter, if globalization then proves itself a worthy guest, then and only then should it receive an open arm welcome. Madam Speaker, in the last 2 decades, the world has moved from an international economy to a global one, in which many of the relationships and mechanisms themselves are global in nature. The outcomes of this process, Madam Speaker, are both stimulating and worrying. I, Madam Speaker, will limit my address to dealing with some of the negative consequences of globalization on small island states in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, with particular emphasis on the Bahamas. It cannot be refuted, Madam Speaker, that much of the Bahamas' economic success has been based on globalization, whether direct or indirect. The tourism and banking industries, for example, which are responsible for bringing in much of the country's profit, call for direct interaction and trade with foreign individuals and countries. For the most part, the country has done extremely well, remaining dependent upon these 2 industries. However, Madam Speaker, The effect of globalization on the Bahamas has not always been positive. Most recently, a major blunder occurred that troubled the country's economy, the spirit of its people, and its economic status locally and overseas. I speak of none other than the Bahama debacle, which involved the still uncompleted construction of a $3.5 billion mega resort and its subsequent collapse into a short-lived Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The mega resort remains unopened in the Cable Beach area on the island of New Providence as I speak, and we would have passed it yesterday on our way to Sandals Key. Not only has the Bahamas' credit rating from Standard & Poor's plummeted to a Baa2 rating with a negative watch outlook, but also 2,000 plus Bahamians have been sent either home or elsewhere in search of previous or new jobs. Similarly, Madam Speaker, the Clifton Key protest is another example of how globalization has begun to negatively engulf the Bahamas. Beyond coastal access, there are issues related to globalization around foreign investment, economic development, and nationalism, where foreign investors are using their economic muscle to wrestle with government for the prize of the country's sovereignty. Globalization's impact on international tourism, business, development, and privatization will then accelerate, and issues such as Clifton Key will continue to come to the fore with increasing frequency. To avert scenarios like this from occurring in the future, Madam Speaker, small island states like the Bahamas must carry out thorough research for improving policy analysis, establish ties with key policy stakeholders in the global arena, work out effective communication links, and improve the training agenda through education of the positive and negative impact of globalization. All of these methods, Madam Speaker, can somehow protect and maintain the interest of small island states before embarking in potentially harmful foreign deals, where some foreign investors are only interested in stripping countries out of their jewels. As my fellow parliamentarian Megan Curry would have alluded to, with globalization often comes the exploitation of labor. While globalization does offer employment, oftentimes workers are not fairly paid and are left protesting against employers who fail to treat employees appropriately. The recent Malia Resort case in the Bahamas is a perfect example of such exploitation.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This involved monies being withheld from working employees who depended on such funds to survive, as minimum wage salaries were not sufficient. The government of the Bahamas and the government of all our fellow Caribbean states The government of the Bahamas and all of our fellow Caribbean states and foreign companies that seek to develop in the Bahamas must come to a mutual agreement that ensures the employment of a set amount of citizens and the fair compensation of those citizens. If those terms laid out in the agreement are not abided by, Madam Speaker, then harsh consequences and penalties must quickly be enforced by the government to ensure that an atmosphere of accountability is quickly cultivated. Therefore, Madam Speaker, fellow member states should take note of what has occurred not only in the Bahamas, but also other countries in this region. Collectively, we must wage war against the negative characteristics that accompany globalization. It must be reiterated that as the Bahamas and countries in this region take the plunge into the ocean of globalization, we must be aware of both the depth of the water and the treacherous dangers that await us. We must therefore arm ourselves accordingly with the proper swimming equipment, which will enable us to navigate successfully a path where the results would be beneficial not only to the international arena, Madam Speaker, but most importantly, to the citizenry of each island state. I thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from Jamaica, Crystal Hoyt. Oh, Barbados, I'm sorry. Barbados, Crystal Hoyt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, many islands, one clear voice. It is the only mindset which facilitates sustainable growth. It is the only mindset which strengthens our global position. It is the only mindset which will save us. When we begin to understand the intricacies of the political landmine that is the global political arena, we will begin to see the potential of CARICOM, the potential of any form of solidarity, Madam Speaker. If we move beyond myopic mindsets, Madam Speaker, we will see integration has to be at the forefront of the agenda. Without a doubt, in the 21st century world, where the rules are constantly being shaped without our input and our destinies being crafted without our consent, we as Commonwealth states must seek to come to a place of recognition that embraces regionalization as our definition of sovereignty. The concept of sovereignty ideally suggests that states are equal with one another and each have the distinct right to implement policies and laws as their country sees fit, necessary for the well-being of their state. In reality, we all know that the global political arena is characterized by either direct or indirect control of weaker states by stronger states, a reality illustrated by the history and contemporary political economy of many of our countries, Madam Speaker, countries that were part of the British colonial empire until the 20th century. Although many of the Commonwealth states had achieved sovereignty by the end of the 20th century, Madam Speaker, their sovereignty was and still is limited. Consequently, if you cannot serve as an accurate illustration of the term, it cannot serve them, Madam Speaker. The limitations to the sovereignty of these states arises from the fact that these states paid for developing world's technological and industrial advancement, but in doing so, their internal development was stunted. Many authors have noted that throughout most of the Caribbean history, the region has functioned as an agent of external economic interests, Madam Speaker, producing agricultural products or relatively unprocessed minerals for export to metropolitan markets. Such a history has allowed for us to remain underdeveloped and our economies shaped by external markets and forces. The truth is that while many of our islands have improved and grown, for many we have reached our prime and have existed in a period of inactivity, stagnant, as we have been unable to diversify our economies, Madam Speaker, to keep up with the international markets. Our position in such markets, Madam Speaker, our position in such markets is a vulnerable one, Madam Speaker, traditionally demoted to the position of supplying the world with raw materials. Our economy is based on the exportation of unprocessed materials and the market's demand for them. Recently, a shift in investment interests has resulted in a redirection of direct foreign investment. New technological advancements have had the impact of making the industrialized world less dependent on the raw materials supplied by the Commonwealth Caribbean states. And therefore, it's no longer a case where small island developing states depend on them for resource floors and technology, and then they depend on us for raw materials. Times are changing, developments are happening, Madam Speaker. Cynthia Barrow Giles asserts that while the notion of sovereignty is challenged by the global development and is not as monolithic today as 30 years ago, it should remain important to countries which have experienced centuries of oppression, denomination and subordination. The Commonwealth Caribbean finds itself in a precarious position, Madam Speaker, as it attempts to balance sovereignty and legitimacy in the global political arena, an arena where sovereignty is being blurred, Madam Speaker, due to recent strides towards internationalism termed globalization. Such strides has significant implications for the state and their ability to implement policies and laws without intervention from foreign countries, Madam Speaker. Such intervention is further encouraged by the concept of globalization, both contested and supported. It encompasses all these processes by which the people of the world are incorporated into a single world society. These processes are encouraged by international trade, investment, and information technology, and result in the integration and interaction among people, governments, cultures.
Honourable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And economies. Thus, globalization not only impacts governance, but it also has significant effects for culture, environment, economic development, and the human capital of states. Ideally, globalists maintain that globalization will foster a steady cash flow into developing countries, which will cause the dollar difference to gradually decrease, as well as increase in investments into developing countries to stimulate their economies. That is the ideal. That is the idea. But that is not the reality, Madam Speaker. We have to redefine our sovereignty by using regional integration and other units to strengthen our political agenda and allow for self-determination. Regional integration is possible. Regional integration is realistic. Regional integration is the only thing that will save us, Madam Speaker. Specifically in the Caribbean region, there have been clear strides for regional integration with the CARICOM framework in education with CSC and UE. Look at the OECS framework. The islands share a single currency, the Eastern Caribbean dollar. Look at how they rallied together to ensure that the IMF did not devalue the Eastern Caribbean dollar. The framework's entire objective is about solidarity and cooperation at a regional and an international level, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, but the framework, like everything else, it is not perfect. It is not perfect, Madam Speaker. And yes, we have Caribbean territories such as Jamaica developing a commission to review their relationship with CARICOM. And though that isn't a signal for CARI-EXIT, it does say that the framework is not working as it should in some areas. It's not as strong as it could be, Madam Speaker. We sometimes fail to recognize the movement of labor is equally as important as the movement of goods. In fact, the movement of goods is equally as important as the movement of people, and therefore we cannot allow for any Caribbean person to be mistreated at any of our regional ports of entry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg leave for just 30 more seconds to conclude.
You may.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You cannot deny that we have made strides. You cannot deny. So to make strides, we have to strengthen our union, so we are not swept along by the tide of globalization without regard to any of our objectives. The community here being small island states. Do not get me wrong, globalization is not all bad and everything is not for a fight. There are always two sides of a coin and two sides of a story, Madam Speaker. Globalization is to reduce barriers such as tariffs and value-added tax, subsidy and other barriers between nations. That is what it's supposed to do, but there are still many barriers.
Member?
Madam Speaker, I bid leave for 30 more seconds of your time, Madam Speaker.
Can you please take your seat?
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Micah Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my colleagues have done a commendable job of extolling the virtues of globalization. Some feel as though globalization is a great virtue, and perhaps it is. I will not seek to convince them of its vices, Madam Speaker, but rather sound a simple note of caution. One cannot deny the fact that those who tend to benefit most from these global schemes are more established, most developed nations of the world, like the United States of America. And for those of you who may be wondering why it is that I've singled out the United States, it is because the winds of change seem to be blowing mostly from that direction. Madam Speaker, on July 10th, 1973, the Bahamas became a sovereign nation, and it was at this juncture in our history that we began the process to acquire ownership of our country in general and our economy in particular. In these formative years, we made great strides as a nation in the pursuit of our national goals. But over the past decades, there has been a sense that something has changed. There is a new feeling in the air. The process in the direction of Bahamianization has either changed direction or just totally stalled. Madam Speaker, and from where I stand as a young Bahamian, it appears as though we are entering a phase of neo-colonialism. And make no mistake, globalization is not the panacea that its proponents will have us to believe.
Madam Speaker, I am under no illusion. I am only too aware that globalization is an idea whose time has come. I am not advocating that we totally reject globalization. But what I am saying is this, Madam Speaker. We should be seeking to control or at least influence the cognitive map. We should seek to influence how globalization is going to be implemented and on whose terms. The implications for globalization for a small, unprepared island state like the Bahamas are daunting. And for any right-thinking person, it is absolutely terrifying. But there are some things we can do as a region to mitigate the negative effects of globalization. The Bahamas does not exist in a vacuum, Madam Speaker. What is true about the effects of globalization on the Bahamas is also true to a greater or lesser degree for all island states. If we are unprepared, globalization, as it is being proposed, will be detrimental for all of us. Madam Speaker, there are several issues we will face if we decide to plunge full force into globalization without first putting some kind of protective measures in place. Because it is still in its developmental stage, we have yet to fully experience the reality of globalization. But here in the Bahamas, we know all too well the effects of monopolies. And when you really look behind the curtain of globalization, it is all about monopolies, but on a global scale. Madam Speaker, the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few is no better than the concentration of wealth in the hands of just a few major powers. We cannot proceed with the idea that market forces should be allowed to hold sway in our economy. It is the responsibility of the government to ensure the protection of the entire economy. It is a well-known fact that all of Western economies are not driven by major conglomerates, but a multiplicity of stakeholders. Madam Speaker, it is the small business that drives the economy. The wealth of our country is already concentrated, but before this problem is dealt with, we are faced with the encroachment of globalization. Globalization is not going to solve the problem. It will simply exacerbate it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have heard the argument that globalization will reduce taxes, subsidize goods, remove barriers between nations. But look at us. This argument rings hollow when you are living a reality that runs counter to it. This brings me to my next point. The rules of globalization are constantly changing. Whenever the powers behind the scenes feel as though things are not working in their favor, there's a shift in policy. Madam Speaker, an article by the Washington Post stated this: the problem is that the big G20 countries have added more than 1,200 import and export restrictive policies since 2008.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. Value-added tax has significantly added to the burden of the average Bahamian. Prior to its implementation, we were already struggling, but since its implementation, the cost of living in the Bahamas has skyrocketed. Madam Speaker, I can assure you that value-added tax at its core is not a Bahamian concept. So where did this foreign idea come from? Can you imagine making the cost of education in the Bahamas more expensive? Well, value-added tax sure took care of that. Value-added tax is also added to the essentials of life, like bread basket items, health insurance, and even vaccinations, Madam Speaker. Yet, vanities like gambling are VAT-free. Where is the rationale for such a strange decision? Right here in the Bahamas, Madam Speaker, Freeport Aggregate and Bahamas Rock have been mining calcium carbonate for years and exporting it. This brings me to another point, Madam Speaker. It is useless to brag about the billions of dollars in exports that the Bahamas produces, not unless you end the vibrato with the lamentation about the fact that the revenue is exported as well. Companies such as Barco, an American-owned company, and Statoil, a Norwegian-owned company, bring billions of gallons of oil into our country to be refined. And yet again, the Bahamian people are not benefiting in any meaningful way. The sad fact about this whole affair, Madam Speaker, is the Bahamian people are totally unaware of what is being done to them. They have no idea of the value of our natural resources, therefore they have no way of benefiting from it. Leaders of the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, it is time to wake up. We can no longer build with the concrete of colonialism. We need a better aggregate. I beg leave for 30 more seconds to conclude, Madam Speaker.
You may.
Thank you. Those of us with a common history and ancestry need to come to the realization that there are things we can do as a region to mitigate the negative effects of globalization. We must focus on securing our region's food supply, alternative energy, crime, and education, and decide how we can best serve our common interest. We must abandon our colonial mindset and strive towards self-sufficiency as a region. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from St. Kitts and Nevis, Rachel Williams.
Madam Speaker, I've risen momentarily to make a contribution to the debate and to give partial support on the particular resolution which states that all nations in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association strengthen their union and take a united stance and fight against the negative aspects of the encroachment of globalization that runs counter to their national interests. But before I do that, Madam Speaker, I wish to pay tribute to 4 gentlemen who were instrumental in setting up this regional youth parliament 16 years ago in the Bahamas. Desmond Ward and Leon Ramig, who are now of blessed memory, and Times Morris and Mr. Farrell Smithen. Madam Speaker, Ralph Gonsalves quite eloquently contended and summed up my argument that our Caribbean civilization, like all civilizations, has been built on labor, the producers and the contours of the society fashioned by the social organization of labor. Our civilization, metaphorically, has emerged as containing the songs of the Kalinagos, Arawaks, and the Merindians, the rhythm of Africa, the chords of Asia, the melody of Europe, and the lyrics of the Caribbean itself. He further went on to say that our Caribbean, viewed as a whole, constitutes a civilization that can be gauged from the following characteristics: a shared history of European conquest, settlement, exploitation, colonialism, and empire, demographics, cultural matrices and milieus, political values, and evolved European languages. Therefore, Madam Speaker, it beckons us to consider, is globalization really an existential threat to the Caribbean's cultural identity, particularly given the fact that globalization is to CARICOM or any other union in this geopolitical space as your half-brother from that village rum of a father you have is to you. He's your brother, but he still isn't your brother. Likewise, globalization is ever present, but still isn't really present, as this Union of Islands forges its socio-economic standings on and by virtue of the hand of globalization. So is globalization really having a negative impact on our sovereignty and integrity when CARICOM is a lose-lose cause? When the whole concept and ideology of CARICOM is based on the precept that if you invest $1 million, you get back $20 at best and none at worst? When the very organ institutions that are supposed to characterize CARICOM are just resource mosquitoes to our socioeconomic development? But then what is troubling, Madam Speaker, is that the resolution is vague in its wording, as there is no specification as to what union we're referring to and what geopolitical yardstick we should use to measure the extent of globalization in this hemisphere. And I therefore pose 2 questions. Is it CARICOM and ACS? And is an amendment to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas a prerequisite? The problem of globalization appears to be ever existential and external to this region, because as Errol Barrow contended, your ambition in life is to try and get away from this country. And you call yourselves an independent nation when all we want to do is go and scrub somebody's floor, or work in somebody's store, or run somebody's elevator, or drive somebody's taxi in a country where you're catching your royal when the winter sets in. Now tell me, Madam Speaker, isn't the problem internal to the Caribbean? I contend, therefore, that it is easy to look at the superficial hurrah of becoming more and more interdependent on the United States and the embattled European Union, and allow them to influence our economies, styles, flair, and nuances, and think that we are dipping in coppers of gold, when in reality, the average Guyanese or Jamaican is still looked at strangely at the immigration booth in Barbados or even Trinidad, although we have in place the Caribbean single market and economy. We must remember that without a glimmer of doubt, the power of the people is still greater than the people in power. And so our success should be measured at a commensurate extent to the graduation of globalization in our region and our region's economies. And so while we look at these phenomena as globalization, these industrialized and condescending monoliths view our adoption and adaptation of their influences as demonization. And in fact, we here in this geopolitical space have conjectured the absurd proposition that if European and American recovery to the global economic and financial crisis can be described as sluggish, the situation in the Caribbean could be worse than it already is. To this, Errol Barrow said, "It is dehumanizing and false to view the Caribbean as potential American problems. We are peoples with an identity and a culture and a history."
Honorable member, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you very much. And we don't need lessons in democracy from anyone. And Madam Speaker, let me add, we don't need lessons in economics from anyone either. Collectively, we have the resource potential necessary for our continued development. What kind of society are we striving for? There is no point striving for utopia, but you do not realize your potential. We have a tool that is oft forgotten. That is, we have a yoke of sovereignty long from Georgetown, Guyana to Timbuktu. Well, let us use it, particularly given the fact that the CARICOM Commission of 2010 stated and concluded that youth are the most underutilized resource for the development of Caribbean communities, countries, and the region. They comprise a sector of the population best positioned by the virtue of their creative potentials in responding to the challenges of globalization. In fact, Maurice Bishop posited in 1981 that we would sooner give up our lives before we compromise, sell out, or betray our sovereignty, independence, integrity, our manhood, and our people's right to national self-determination and social progress. Madam Speaker, I leave to let rest on our minds for the rest of the week that the perfect country with a checked and balanced system of allowing globalization to run its course has a mirror image of themselves. They have self-respect. They have a desire to move their country forward by their own devices. They are not waiting for anybody to come and give them handouts, and there is no unemployment. Madam Speaker, is that the mirror image that you have of yourselves? I am obliged to you, Madam Speaker, on the basis that we review this resolution, particularly given the fact that we are the only ones in this Caribbean region truly encroaching ourselves.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from St. Kitts, Sanhai Liberd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A great man once said that in any country, there are 3 types of people. The first group is the caretakers. These people take care of their other people's business other than their own. The second is the undertakers. These people take on things even in a public arena. And the last group are the risk takers, the visionaries, the people who see possibilities in the list of impossibilities. These are the people who realize that they can turn their test of the past into testimonies of the future. And these are the people sitting in this hall today, Madam President. Madam President, based on my understanding of the resolution, we as future leaders of our countries are here to discuss how small island developing states can strengthen and come together as one people to combat the negative effects of globalization. So, Madam Speaker, representatives of the House, Bahamians, people of the region, and the international audience, permit me just a few minutes of your time to present to you a few suggestions that would benefit each and every single one of our islands in breaking the chains that bind us. According to Bite Size, an online study support for school-age students, globalization is the process by which the world is becoming increasingly interconnected as a result of massively increased trade and cultural exchange. It also went on to state that globalization has increased the production of goods and services. Well, Madam Speaker, seeing that globalization has these two positive effects, why is it that we as a region are importing more products than we are exporting them? Why isn't there mass production of the natural produce that we have, such as vegetables and poultry? Why is it that we so easily adopt the cultures from around the world that have borne fruits of negativity? Are we saying that we are too small to make an impact on the world, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, permit me to first address the issue of our culture and heritage. Cultures and heritages of each SIDS need to be preserved. This preservation is not just for today, but it is for tomorrow and most importantly for future generations. Through globalization, we need to preserve and respect the culture and heritage of each region. Heritage tourism plays an important role in the region, particularly in Nevis, and so efforts are currently being undertaken to have Charlestown, the capital of Nevis, be established as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This project is being undertaken by Ambassador of St. Kitts Nevis, Dr. Everson Hall, to the Organization of the American States. If this feat is to be achieved, Madam Speaker, the Hamilton Museum, which will be the centerpiece of the Charlestown Heritage Site, will be recognized along with other renowned sites, such as the Great Wall of China, Australia's Great Barrier Reef, and St. Kitts Brimstone Hill Fortress. This will not just be of World Heritage value for Nevis, but for the world on a whole, Madam Speaker. Work will also be undertaken on historical sites and documents. Documents will be digitized and put online so that they can be accessed worldwide. This is also a preservation method in cases of disasters or if originals are misplaced. Historic reports would be done on other structures, such as the famous Bath Hotel of 1778, the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton, the Jewish Cemetery, Fort Charles, and the slave market. My point of view is that our island should come together and form a committee with a governing body to preserve our culture and heritage. We are grateful to UNESCO to have our heritage and culture recognized. We are one Caribbean, Madam Speaker, and once we come together as one, we are stronger than when standing separately. Through globalization, efforts should be made to educate our people about their culture and heritage. Madam Speaker, this now brings me to the next issue at hand, which is food security. Permit me to expound on two development areas which my homeland of Nevis is currently working towards, namely improved technology and value addition. Madam Speaker, the Caribbean has many delicacies that many tourists enjoy when they visit our shores and crave after they have left. In collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism and Agro Department, have utilized technology by developing an agro-processing unit to manufacture products such as jams and jellies and sauces. Production of a range of flours from cassava and breadfruit is also produced. Additionally, Madam Speaker, production of numerous processed products using advanced technology at the abattoir, such as hams and sausages, is done. Madam Speaker, I did not plan to spend much time here, but this is an area that touches me deeply, Madam Speaker. We need to support our own local and regional companies. Madam Speaker, in Nevis, we have adopted and promoted the Agriculture Department theme, adapting to climate change to achieve greater food security, whereby the Caribbean region should buy local, eat local.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, importing these foods can bring diseases into our countries that cause loss of lives and incur expenses into our already struggling economies. Madam Speaker, let me move on to my next point because developing hypertension at this tender age is against my doctor's recommendation of living a long and fruitful life. Madam Speaker, we now have to embark on large food production shade house technology and management to aid in our food security. Let us increase the use of greenhouses and electric fences, as these would aid in desisting monkeys, which would mean increase in crop production in our islands. Let us make use of drip irrigation to water plants and conserve it. Plastic mulching can be utilized in the suppression of weeds. Madam Speaker, I wish to expound more on other areas of technology advancement as they relate to concessions, training, and fisheries, but time will not permit me to do so. In closing, Madam Speaker, we SIDS countries share many common development challenges, including geographic and economic isolation, limited resources, high cost of transportation, and natural disasters. But we no longer have to fight these battles alone, Madam Speaker, because after today, I expect us to be more of our brothers' keepers. Madam Speaker, let not this strengthened union be just for the Eastern Caribbean, but for the entire Caribbean region. There's a saying that goes, it takes a village to raise a child. So then, Madam Speaker, it takes each country to make the Caribbean region stronger. We have depended on first world countries for far too long, Madam Speaker. We have been standing still for far too long. We need to stand together and help our brothers and sisters because we are one Caribbean, Madam Speaker. Let us adopt John Dixon's phrase, united we stand, divided we fall, and be united as one people, operating as one body with one head. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Cayman Islands, Aniqua Banks.
Madam Speaker, the motion we are dealing with today touches on fighting the negative aspects of the encroachment of globalization because it runs counter to national interests. However, globalization is the reality of today, particularly when everyone can be considered a citizen of the world. This is evident where persons are given free movement to seek their fortunes in advanced nations far from their homes. Richard B. Freeman, from the National Bureau of Economic Research, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, supports this position when he argues, people flows are fundamental to creating a global economy, particularly where the interplay among immigration and capital and trade are used as indicators in understanding the way globalization affects economies. Yet, it is important to address Brexit, as Britain has recently left the European Union. This move suggests that globalization leads to the depletion of a country's purse. Thus, it is important to reel in the lines of dependency upon unions. This strategic move is not new. For our regional history shows that in 1956, the British Caribbean Federation Act united the Caribbean, establishing the West Indies federal government. Unfortunately, this union failed to flourish because prominent territories at the time were concerned about their expectation to shoulder the financial burdens of islands that held lesser economies. Yet, our current environment in the Caribbean must be distinguished from these two events. This is because we now know more about one another and have established our own single market, the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, which has not interfered with our individualism. Instead, our willingness to work with one another and promote greater movement of skilled professionals has enabled us to flourish. Even islands, which are only associated members of CARICOM, like us in the Cayman Islands, embrace this vision. This is illustrated when we hire professionals from the Caribbean, as well as those from all over the world, to drive our economy, be it financial services, tourism, or our newest pillar, medical tourism. Arguably, Cayman's acceptance and embracement of globalization is nothing new. For many years, our men sailed the seas for employment as revered sailors and ship captains working on merchant ships. As their salaries were paid in dollars, banks were brought to our shores. Soon after, our forefathers recognized this as a potential new revenue earner and created the financial services infrastructure, and we have never looked back. Today, our financial services industry ranks among the top in the world. In our local economy, financing and insurance services account for the largest segment of our GDP. Overall, our service-producing sector was 94.8% in 2014. As the front runners, we have set the standards as well as helped create regulations in this global industry. The UK Treasury Secretary, George Osborne, wrote a letter dated 10th of May 2016 to our Financial Services Minister, Honorable Wayne Panton, acknowledging this lead position when he commended our contribution to global transparency with the hopes of replicating it. Our other major industry, tourism, also flourishes through globalization. Like many of us in the Caribbean, we have attracted top tourism providers such as the Ritz-Carlton, the Four Seasons, along with world-class restaurants run by top-starred chefs. This consistent commitment to globalization has enabled Cayman to reinvent ourselves in order to keep our economy buoyant. This was illustrated when we extended our product to include a medical tourism during the last global economic crisis. This medical component involved a partnership with the top medical facility from India and the construction of Health City in the eastern part of Grand Cayman, which focuses on highly advanced cardiac and orthopedic diagnostics and surgeries. These services are not only available to locals, but extended to patients within the region. Yes, globalization has affected our population. 50 years ago, Cayman's population hadn't even reached 10,000 people. 50 years later, our small islands attract people from all over the world, growing the population to be 60,413 people in 2015. According to the Cayman Islands immigration statistics, we have over 130 different nationalities in our workforce. It seems unimaginable. Yet, our ability to properly understand globalization and utilize its benefit to fit the needs of our island has caused us to certainly thrive.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Therefore, in my view, benefits of globalization far outweigh any perceived issues, such as the erosion of cultural identity, as mentioned in this resolution. Yes, cultural identity is vital to each and every one of us. Yet where the Caribbean derives from a mixture of numerous cultures, that in itself demonstrates globalization. Nonetheless, it is important to distinguish between heritage and culture. Heritage is the historical origin of acquired cultural norms and beliefs that we want to preserve, whereas culture is a vibrant and evolving entity in today's communities. However, we understood this distinction long before other regions and are superior to others who are still struggling with race, such as the USA, who still distinguishes their citizens as African American, Hispanics, and Reserve American to those who are white. Have you ever heard the Caribbean class people of their citizens as such? No. Regardless of your color, your hair, your dress, you are a Caymanian, Jamaican, Trinidadian, Bahamian, etc. Yes, we are different, but does this necessarily mean a synonym for being bad? I don't think so. I feel our Caribbean individualism is what makes us unique. Our ability to adapt and embrace others highlights tolerance and competence. Our diverse communities throughout the Caribbean are a demonstration of this. I say, let us utilize the valuable knowledge we have gained about our individual strengths to reinvent the Union. If we enhance each of our individual strengths collectively and work together, we can promote the interests of all member states and raise the standard of living for all. Recently, the Premier of the Cayman Islands, Honorable Alden McLaughlin, said, "Those who don't evolve become dinosaurs." And I agree. I beg 30 more seconds, please.
You may.
I strongly believe it is hard to ignore how globalization has influenced our everyday lives. Take, for example, the advancement in technologies. If the Cayman Islands had turned its back on the expansion and advancement of our telecommunication and utilities, we would have run the risk of not being competitive. As a person of the younger generation, I get this. We constantly interact, create, share, and exchange information ideas in virtual communities and networks. Social media is at the tip of our fingers.
Member, can you please take your seat? As many The chair recognizes the honorable member from St. Kitts and Nevis, Aaliyah Maynard.
Madam Speaker, all across the region and across the world, the effects of globalization are quite apparent. We see the effects of globalization in the manner in which we communicate with each other, the way we express ourselves through art, through dress, and through our cuisine. Globalization, which is the process by which the world is becoming increasingly interconnected as a result of massively increased trade and cultural exchange, in my mind, is a double-edged sword, Madam Speaker. It is a state of affairs which does harm as well as good. Madam Speaker, globalization isn't coming, it is here. Globalization is our reality. Reality shows and social media are so mainstream that our culturally authenticated way of life is being significantly eroded. Madam Speaker, communication is now limited to handsets, smartphones, and tablets. We are so dependent on these devices that we have forgotten that eye contact is essential. When speaking with a person, we forget that cellular phones and tablets have no place atop the dinner table. Now, Madam Speaker, we in this region are not suggesting that we ignore the positive effects of globalization. Our nations have grown and benefited greatly from globalization. We can credit this phenomenon for the vast publicity and exposure which our island paradises enjoy. Madam Speaker, we can also thank globalization for keeping us abreast of various developments around our global community. However, the negative impact which this exposure has had on our society is simply not good enough. Madam Speaker, we in this region are suggesting that we implement appropriate measures which would adequately address the growing resultant negative effects of globalization while safeguarding our nationalism, the authenticity of our culture and strength of our beloved sovereign. While safeguarding, our nationalism, the authenticity of our culture and strength of our beloved sovereignty. Nations across the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the CPA must strengthen the union and take a united stance and fight against the negative aspects of the enrichment of globalization that runs counter to our national interests. Further, that this strengthened union which we aim to create must commit itself to the preservation of the interest of all of its member states by entering into regional trade and exchange agreements for food security, education, health, and other aspects of culture. This, Madam Speaker, I believe must begin by the elimination of the me attitude. Our people have become increasingly concerned only about their employment status, only their economic progress, only their literacy rate. Madam Speaker, we do not pay enough attention to the economic progress of our neighboring nations. We do not care about regional education. Here is where the major problem arises. We cannot be unified as a region if some of our nation's economies are failing, yet we turn a blind eye. In this light, Madam Speaker, this region pledges to work along with other regions to provide assistance in an effort to alleviate the economic, social, and financial burdens which arise from this unequal distribution of stability. This region recommends that traveling task forces be instituted which will travel to various nations to address the various economic and financial difficulties which our nations face. We currently enjoy the free movement of work and skilled professionals. Madam Speaker, those citizens to assist us in the various areas of need. Call on the agriculturists to weigh in on food security. Call on the scientists and economists to assist us with our struggling economies. There is strength in numbers, Madam Speaker, and I guarantee that our region is strong. We have more than enough skilled professionals who are unemployed not because they are lazy, but because our governments are not creative enough when it comes to putting its human resources to good use. We need people to work.
Madam Speaker, we need brains. We need different outlooks and perspectives.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is that our help will come from our people. This vision further recommends that our nations do more to promote the goals and aims of CARICOM and CSME. CARICOM has powers which are yet to unlock because we too often underestimate its ability to deliver us from poverty and other burdens. Organizations which resemble CARICOM strive in other regions of the world. Why can't it strive here? We must change our mentality if we are to keep up with the changes we face as a result of globalization. We must use CARICOM as it holds the answers we so desperately search for. In closing, Madam Speaker, let me say that the only way that our democracies can survive the threats of globalization is by standing together. The only way we can avoid being swept along like ships with no sails is by standing together. The only way we can protect our cultural identities is by standing together. Standing together does not mean simply agreeing. It does not mean coming up with a plan. It means actively setting out to protect and safeguard our interests through our plans. It requires actions, foresight, and ingenuity, and these are traits and habits which this region has. So may it please you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from St. Kitts, Tasai Pemberton.
Madam Speaker, members of this honorable House, a pleasant good afternoon. Alan Greenspan, former U.S. Federal Reserve Board Chairman, in his book, The Age of Turbulence, published in 2007, writes, and I quote, "A fully globalized world is one in which unfettered production, trade, and finance are driven by profit-seeking and risk-taking that are wholly indifferent to distance and national borders," end of quote. The difficulty with this is that in the global scheme of things, as small island states in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region, we find ourselves being swallowed up as mere minnows in an ocean of sharks. We face the very real threat of losing our sovereignty, our identity, sacrificed on the altar of globalization. In order to deepen our understanding, we must consider, what is globalization? Which states are considered to be small island developing states? And what is meant by the term sovereign? According to www.globalization101.org, and I quote, "Globalization is a process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology. This process has effects on the environment, on culture, on political systems, on economic systems, development and prosperity, and on human physical well-being in societies around the world," end of quote. There is absolutely no doubt about that in the Caribbean region, which consists of countries from Bahamas in the north to Guyana in the south, are just being swept along the globalization path with many debilitating effects economically, politically, and socially. Google.com defines the term sovereign state as a quote, "a state which governs itself." Dictionary.com informs us govern means having the ability to make laws. However, small island states, having already found themselves legislated against in preferential trade agreements by the World Trade Organization, which virtually destroy the economies of states such as Dominica and St. Lucia and other banana-producing countries, and some who have watched their offshore financial services industry dry up and now operate in fear of being blacklisted by the OECD countries, complements of globalization. All of this must be viewed against the backdrop that as small island developing states, we have huge trade imbalances with the rest of the world, especially as a result of our huge food import bill, which threatens food security in the entire region. Politically, a perfect example of how globalization has undermined our sovereignty is the new banking regulations factor, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, which was designed for countries such as the US to profit by imposing new mandatory financial reporting regulations on the Caribbean banking system almost immediately. This law was imposed on us with absolutely no debate, nor discussion of the possible impacts to the countries involved. Yet, Madam President, these are supposed to be sovereign states. Thirdly, our cultural identity, who we are as a people, is changing. Roxanne Burton, in a paper on globalization and cultural identity in the Caribbean society, the Jamaican case, posits, and I quote, "Our culture can be illuminated by focusing on areas such as language, the imaginative, visual and performing arts, music, patterns of eating, and images such as dress and conceptions of beauty." End of quote. If we accept this view, then it is impossible to argue that the Caribbean culture is not steadily being eroded as a result of the negative impact of globalization. The fast food industry, the use of social media, and even this gun culture that is threatening to destroy Caribbean societies are all the direct result of globalization. However, Madam Speaker, it is not the intention of this presentation to claim that globalization has only resulted in negative consequences on small and developing states. In fact, globalization has brought us democratic institutions that has helped to strengthen the economy and the integration movement in the region on a whole.
Honorable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Such examples are the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, the Caribbean Common Market, the University of the West Indies, the Universities of Technology, to name a few, each with a mandate to build the region economically or educationally. Madam Speaker, it would be naive of us to imagine that globalization is going to disappear anytime soon. There is no time turning back the wheels of globalization. That is why I propose the following recommendations to reduce its negative impact on our small island developing states. 1, governments must unite and demand with one voice any decision or legislation that is likely to impact countries in the region. 2, in an effort to move towards greater food security, Caribbean governments must decide to subsidize our farmers and agro-processors and embark, as my colleague said, a buy local, eat local campaign. 3, in the area of health, we must create one regional group insurance plan so that everyone can benefit. 4, universities and other educational institutions in the region must give priority to developing our cultural identity and building the human resource capacity needs of the region. Madam Speaker, I am confident that if these matters are addressed as a matter of urgency, then as small island developing states, we would well be on our way to combating the adverse effects of globalization. May it please you, Madam President. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from Barbados, Kobe Brooms.
Madam Speaker, it would please me to no end to paint you a pretty picture of rainbows and unicorns, of cotton candy fields and of lollipop trees. But globalization is undemocratic. Globalization is partisan. Globalization is misdirected. And these are not my words, Madam Speaker. These are not my words. These are words used by people from across the globe to describe globalization. Persons have recognized that the pipe dream that we have been sold as small island developing states, the dream that would make us and have us to believe that we are all members of the global political community, and that we would reap the bountiful harvest of cooperation and interdependency heralded by globalization. However, Madam Speaker, I come to you as the bearer of truth. Clarity where others have merely sought to cloud your minds. A reality check amidst fallacies. Today I have been sent to clear the debris and to give you a chance to catch up in the race where your opponent has given themselves a jump start, and handicapped you by putting you in lane 8. Madam Speaker, sovereignty, what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is an illusion of this 21st century for developing states, and globalization is merely a 21st century colonialism wrapped in a pretty bow and parceled out to us as intergovernmental organization and liberal policies. I beg the members in this House not to paint butterflies or roses onto globalization by applauding international organizations such as Amnesty International, the United Nations, or other global actors, because that is what they are, actors. As the prominence of these organizations have allowed them to restrict, confine, and impede on state sovereignty due to their increasing importance on the world stage. The sovereignty that we portray as Barbados, the sovereignty that we portray as Bahamas, the sovereignty that we portray as Trinidad and Tobago is a mere fallacy, is a mere facade rather. And in reality, we only have political authority, but we do not have political power. And we are merely puppets of the more developed countries. Globalization has resulted in a general shift of power, and this can no longer simply encompass developed countries, but must be broadened to include organizations that are multilateral corporations and transnational corporations and other international organizations. However, these new core of actors are simply extensions of industrialized countries from which they originate. However, their impact can be best interpreted as neoliberal policies. This is done to the best interest of their states, of their countries, because they contribute more to the fund. Neoliberal policies have inarguably generated wealth, but this wealth, for the most part, has not been distributed to those who need it. Madam Speaker, we constantly find ourselves on our knees begging for funding, and this should not be so. Madam Speaker, I have been silent for some time in this debate, but the time has come for us to chart this debate from one of idle talk and partisan rhetoric to a meaningful and informative discussion. And I will offer a fact check. Madam Speaker, the sleeping giant has arisen. Fact check number 1. You have heard that globalization allows for free trade, and it's supposed to reduce barriers such as tariffs, value-added tax, and subsidies, and other hindrances between nations. But fact check, Madam Speaker, this is far from the truth. There are still many borders to free trade, and the problem is that the big G20 countries have added more than 1,200 restrictive import and export measures thanks to the global economic crisis in 2008, which are still in effect. 161 countries have value-added tax on imports, some as high as 21.6%, and we in the Caribbean can attest to this. Number 2, competition. Globalization tells us that competition between countries is supposed to drive prices down. Fact check. Do you think that is so, Madam Speaker? It is not. In many cases, this is not working because countries manipulate their dollar to get a price advantage. Globalization has led to the exploitation of labor. Prisoners and child workers are being made to work in inhumane conditions.
Honorable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Safety standards are being ignored to produce cheap goods, which leads to an increase of human trafficking, and this is another reality that we face in the Caribbean. Madam President, as I close, I wish to bring this down to our regional level. Since inception, the longest standing item on the agenda of CARICOM has been regional integration. And Madam President, where are we on that? Because I cannot see any strides that we have been making. It is lacking in critical areas and desperately needs our attention. Madam Speaker, in CARICOM, we face what I say, the implementation disorder. And it appears to be nothing more than talk shop. Declarations are signed, treaties are proposed, but there is nothing to truly govern the implementation of each state that has signed on, that it be made law, for lack of a better word. Take, for instance, a couple years ago, Barbados could not get the main protein to our national dish, flying fish. And our fisher folk were detained in some Caribbean islands because they did not recognize the maritime agreements, they did not recognize the multilateral agreements, they did not recognize the bilateral agreements. Madam Speaker, as I reiterate, we cannot make these small yet simple things work, and you're trying to tell me that we can take on globalization. So I am pleading with the members of this House to take all the points that were listed here for globalization, the parts that have been brought forward, take into consideration the credit ratings, commerce, cultural identity, and trade, and also the sovereignty. And I will ask the members in this House to vote their conscience so that we can make the Caribbean great. Madam Speaker, I beg for 30 more seconds.
You may.
Thank you. And we can come together to achieve a better tomorrow. Madam Speaker, I neglected in my speech that one of the more, I would say, disastrous things that has happened to the Caribbean is that we contribute less to climate change, but we're the most affected by it. And we can see this in the rising temperatures of our seawaters. We can see this. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the British Virgin Islands, Trayvon Totman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nelson Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which can be used to change the world." Many of us here today learn in some way how many of our forefathers had school sitting under a tree, writing on a slate or in a structure not like today's standard. Through globalization, we have evolved in technology or educational advances, and differently able citizens can now be helped by specialized persons. Globalization has empowered a process of interaction and integration amongst the people, companies and governments of different realms, and is driven by international trade and investments and aided by information technology. This process has effects on the well-being in societies around the world. As time goes by, the world is evolving. With more technological advances, even Noah had technology to build the ark. The Wright brothers had technology to build aeroplanes. In today's world, their technology would be outdated. So man's education has helped him to try to find ways to do things better and of good quality. Today we have evolved from computers and televisions with the extended head to they are flat screen. We now have perfect communications. We have moved from telegraph to smartphones, traditional books to Kindles, donkeys to Land Rovers, black and white turn knob TVs to HD TV. How did we really benefit from these advances? Because of globalization, we can attain products from China, the United States of America, to help us to be more efficient in the way we operate. Despite all imported goods, Trinidad, Jamaica, and Barbados, just to name a few, are producing products for retail. Perhaps to strengthen this regional commerce, we should utilize more of what is being offered in the Commonwealth. Within the Commonwealth region, we should look at our strengths and weaknesses and find best ways in which we can start creating our own products on a large scale and move away from the great amount of imported goods. The Commonwealth is far more advanced today, and it's time that we grow up and seize the day and create an atmosphere where all people can be a part of regional growth. We live in a region where we need more degrees to match our economy. Perhaps if the Caribbean was one unit, we all could look at our strong degree courses being offered and develop it. If someone in St. Kitts wants to pursue maritime studies, the British Virgin Islands, or right here, the Bahamas, would be the choice for cross-regional training. If you're interested in medical studies, why not try Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia, or Dominica? What about veterinary or zoology? St. Kitts. What about law? Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad. This is not an exhausted list of what each country can offer. With a system like that, we would also need to have special rates to accommodate our people. Just like the USA has in and out of state tuition, we could have regional tuition for people within the Caribbean and out of the Caribbean. We cannot forget our differently able persons. Wouldn't it be wise to have specialized training of personnel to help care for our differently able? Many study to become social workers. Perhaps that program can allow persons to specialize in caring for the demographic. We live in a region where many years ago, Europeans depended on us to make things for them. Have we forgotten? Bear making, bush medicine, don't you think?
Honorable Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Don't you think those are areas that can be groomed into a success story? We need to make each island a hub for different specialties. It will help the commerce of the region and specific islands that provide the service. Things like the above can only happen if we have less talk, more action. We have to develop our people, and as Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which can be used to change the world. If we educate our people, we will be developing our human resources. We won't have a hard time finding people to fill positions. In my research of the region, there's a common trend. We discuss the same matters over and over, but no action is taken upon conclusion of our gatherings. Whether we like it or not, it is time to get our act together. We gather here today to discuss a motion that all regional leaders should have already been executing from time Rock of Ages was a pebble. Perhaps, instead of discussing this motion, we need to rethink the way we function as a region and see why many initiatives never blossom into what they were meant to. We need regional growth to meet the rest of the world's advances. Let us then work together and create our own success story. So what are we going to do? Are we giving solutions that still may not be executed? We are calling on all leaders to move this pendulum so that we, youth, will only be building on your strong foundation. With all confidence, I believe when we leave the CPA conference, we are going to be renewed. Can I have some more time, please? 30 minutes?
You may have 30 seconds.
Renewed, invigorated, and motivated to deliver on these long-standing issues that continue to appear on the menu over and over. We need to stop this talk shop and, as a region, and move in one direction to negotiate, navigate globalization. It is time to reach our full potential, remembering that we have one aim, one destiny. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from Barbados, Joanna Bovell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
They call it globalization. They wrap their capital-based phenomenon in glittering paper and tie it with a bow whilst marketing it as the new stepping stone for development. Yet we should know better. West Indians should know firsthand that the empires built on the backs of slaves and ill-gotten gain cannot stand on the independent efforts of those whom were too incompetent to build them in the first place. Not just Caribbean sovereignty, but actual survival is being attacked by a neoliberal agenda to reincorporate not just the former second world, but the new third world, right back into the world's capitalist economy for sheer exploitation, to the complete loss of our economic sovereignty. It could never be the truth's business to render itself pleasant. We should be discussing the strategic repositioning of the Caribbean to avoid ourselves falling victim to the contradiction, economic development by economic enslavement. I know you saw that contradiction. The best resistance to this agenda is collective self-reliance. And if this Isle of the West Indies, and listen to the harshness in my voice, if the Isle of the West Indies decides to resign itself to its immaturity, understand that you resign yourselves to wear the new chains that you will wear in silence. If the aim of this resolution is to encourage the recognition of the theory promoted by Kenneth and Hall, and I quote, that interregional investment and interregional trade should lead the way for regional integration necessary to fight globalization and retain economic sovereignty, I wholeheartedly lend my support. However, a nation that forgets its history will forever be locked in the mistakes of its forefathers. So therefore, before we panic and become lost, there is guidance. In 1992, the West Indian Commission released a report called A Time for Action that was shamefully regurgitated by the IMF. So regardless of how colonized your mind is, you should pay attention. This report actually academically resolved the problem of us retaining our economic sovereignty. Excuse me, while I quote, the original plan was to maximize the uses and develop the Treaty of Chaguaramas, in particularly CSME, to consolidate our power as a region to maximize our competitiveness with the concept of functional cooperation as our guide. That foothold was intended to maximize not just interregional trade agreements, but extra-regional agreements, and give life to a regionally owned private sector necessary to achieve sustainable socio-economic development. We were guided, West Indians. So where did we go wrong? If I refer to our academics like Richard Bernal, Wendy Grenade, they would tell us the incorrect definition of our sovereignty, FDI overdependence, political immaturity, manufacturing and export incapability. Those are the threads that we use to plait the rope that we use to hang ourselves. Yes. Wow. Our salvation lies. Now you see, when I wrote this presentation, I had a choice. I could stand up here and rattle off the problems, or I could try to bring solutions in my most humble opinion. Our salvation lies in our transnational and national CARICOM firms operating within a fully realized CSME. Notice I said transnational CARICOM firms. I am pointing to a regionally owned private sector. I am not talking about each individual country competing to the death of ourselves, excelling in the prostitution of our islands. The prostitution of our islands to achieve development. If we are to succeed, collective reliance is our best defense. We must come together to fleece those who have come to make our governments nothing more than facilitators of transnational capital to support their capitalism-infected democracies. That cannot be our fate for a second time. Krugman rightfully argued that competitiveness is a meaningless word when applied to national economies. The consolidation of market share and freedom through CSME will garner massive investment opportunity. Now, I must make it very clear. Here, the task that I do not envy that our leaders have to manage national interests and regional interests starts here. Understand that I don't care how big your island is. We are all small. If regional interests do not supersede, and become at the forefront of our national interests, and we fail regionally and competitively, we are written off. we are all going to starve. Not one of us, not two of us, all of us.
Member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government must now take on new, more flexible forms of government. We have got to garner populations that are business savvy, that are economically aggressive, that are willing to not just buy into our regional firms, but demand that some firms become regional and demand that our governments not just walk in and take up the investments that are left behind as we are quote-unquote abandoned, but they see themselves as taking over these firms that once fleeced them for their development. That is extremely critical. It is time for our populations to now own parts of our government agencies. Consider your National Cultural Foundation. That's what we have in Barbados. How do you feel about citizens owning shares in the National Cultural Foundations and benefiting off of the profits from carnivals that we have every year? The Caribbean must proceed understanding this economic paradigm for exactly what it is. Time waits for nobody, and it is not going to wait for us. We are too intelligent to continue with constitutions that allow prime ministers to roam like dictators and accept partisan politics to the point where it drags us down to the level of banana republics. We are too intelligent for that. We cannot win this battle if we are not politically mature. Westminster has got to fall. Bipartisan leadership has got to rise. We are not going to develop the consensus we need to survive as long as we are bickering at a national level. And I'm going to quote a slave master whose name has actually fallen away, but his quote remains the same. Give them scraps and tell them there is nothing more, and watch them kill each other for nothing. Divide them up and you are assured control. Every time, may I have 30 seconds, please?
Yes, you may.
Every time you see or hear us squabbling, understand that the crack of Master's whip is a lot closer than it seems. Understand that the crack of Master's whip is echoing in how we behave. We have got to be better than that. West Indians, we are better than that.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Keyshawn Barnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Here we all sit, or rather in my instance stand, dressed in clothes with a high percentage of being designed in the US, manufactured in China, while participating in a system that at its core is not Bahamian, nor is it from this region, but rather, Madam Speaker, it is English. This is globalization. It is a process that has taken our world by storm, transforming and impacting all of our lives. The resolution that has been presented before the House today, Madam Speaker, seeks to address the issue of globalization, not just in the context of the Bahamas, but small island states throughout the region. It calls for the strengthening of a union between our states to fight against what it calls the encroachment of globalization. Madam Speaker, I cannot support such a resolution. Its wording is vague, and most importantly, it proposes a solution that at its best is unnecessary, but at its worst is counterproductive. Within the resolution itself, it states that countries must unite against the negative aspects of globalization, whilst never stating exactly what those negative aspects are. And these, like national interests, vary from country to country. Additionally, Madam Speaker, it asks that the nations commit themselves to unite against it asks that the nations of this region commit themselves to further regionalization, which, Madam Speaker, as its very name might suggest, is simply a scaled-down version of globalization. Furthermore, and Madam Speaker, this is indeed one of the bigger points. The resolution is unclear as to whether it is calling for the creation of a new union or the strengthening of one that already exists under the Treaty of Chaguaramas that saw to the establishment of CARICOM. And I will tell you this, Madam Speaker, for such a system to effectively exist, as we have seen time and time again, whether it's been in this region, in the African Union, or within the EU, would require centralization and further integration, tenets of globalization that the resolution itself opposes. Globalization has undeniably been good for the world. Today, at this present time, more so than any other point in our history, Madam Speaker, has the world been connected more politically, economically, or culturally. To the creation of countless opportunities, Madam Speaker, millions, I will even go further to say billions of people across the world have been lifted out of poverty, Madam Speaker, and the arts as well as technological progress have flourished. But it hasn't come without a cost. As the world finds itself moving closer and closer together, states have found themselves losing importance to larger multinational bodies, whether it be the IMF, the WTO, or the United Nations. Adjusting to the loss of power can never be easy. And time again, Madam Speaker, we have seen pushback. What I fear is what the resolution will lead to. Regional isolationism. And this is something that isn't just occurring here, but rather across the world. It is asking that the nations of this region look towards themselves rather than the world, to protect themselves from the encroachment of globalization. Yet it does not state how this protects said states, but rather assumes it will do so. What I fear, Madam Speaker, is in our rush to harp on the perils of globalization, we blind ourselves to its potential and promise. A few days ago, a friend of mine likened globalization to a tide sweeping across the world. I believe, Madam Speaker, if we can learn to manage with the tide rather than simply treading along, then the greatest little countries on earth, not just the Bahamas, Trinidad, Barbados, all of us can become even greater. I am not blind, Madam Speaker.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I suffer no delusions that the changes ensued as a result of globalization have been transformative. But the poet John Donne once said, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." I would like to go further. No island is an island unto itself. We are as much a part of the world as it is a part of us. We cannot close ourselves off to it. And the idea that doing so will not only protect us from globalization, but be beneficial for us in the long run is simply fantastical. And that is not the same as being fantastic. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Are there any further resolutions?
Madam Speaker, I rise to propose the following resolution.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Gabrielle Colley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to propose the following resolution. Be it resolved that the previously agreed resolution be presented to the Speaker for onward transmission to all presiding officers of the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association.
Is there a seconder? As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. We, the youth parliamentarians, have collectively and unanimously agreed to a resolution for onward transmission to all speakers of the respective parliaments of the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I now invite the Speaker of the House of Assembly of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Dr. Honorable Kendall Major, to the floor for a copy of this said resolution.
By the authority invested in me as Honorable Speaker and Chair of the 41st Annual Regional Conference of the Caribbean, Atlantic, and Region, and this 16th Youth Parliamentarians Conference, it reads thus: we, the youth parliamentarians of this 41st Regional Conference of the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, having met in committee, did resolve and state as follows. Whereas globalization as a philosophical position has filtered into all political ideologies, and whereas globalization as a new order will affect every nation of the world, and whereas the next generation of world leaders must be chosen from the ranks of youth, be it now resolved that the youth of every nation in the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association be made a permanent part of the consultative process for all future agreements and implementation of all further aspects of the globalization process. Be it resolved. Congratulations.
Are there any further resolutions? The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Megan Curry.
Madam Speaker, I rise to move the following resolution. Resolve that this youth parliament do adjourn sine die.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that this youth parliament be adjourned sine die. As many as are in favor will stand. The motion is carried. This youth parliament is adjourned sine die.